The wind cut across the Wyoming Badlands like a blade made of ice and spite. January 1884 had arrived meaner than usual, bringing storms that buried fence posts and killed cattle where they stood. Out here, 200 miles from anything resembling civilization, the land didn't forgive mistakes. It just buried them under snow and moved on. Rhett Calloway stood at the window of his ranch house, watching another blizzard roll across the plains like a gray wall swallowing the world. He was 36 years old, built like someone who'd spent half his life breaking horses and the other half breaking men who thought they could take what wasn't theirs. His face carried the kind of hardness that comes from learning early that kindness gets you killed, and his eyes, pale blue, almost colorless in certain light, hadn't softened in nearly a decade. Behind him, the house stretched out in expensive silence. Mahogany furniture shipped from Denver, Persian rugs that cost more than most ranchers made in a year, a stone fireplace big enough to roast a whole steer, all of it chosen by an interior decorator from Cheyenne who Rhett had paid double to finish the job in half the time and then never return. The place looked like money, because it was. The Calloway Ranch sprawled across 40,000 acres of prime grazing land, employed 60 men year-round, and ran 15,000 head of cattle. Rhett had clawed his way up from nothing, a half-starved kid who'd arrived in Wyoming territory at 17 with a stolen horse and enough anger to fuel a small war. 20 years later, he owned more land than some eastern states, and he was completely alone. Mr. Calloway, Rhett didn't turn around. He recognized the voice of Marcus Webb, his foreman, a weathered man in his 50s who'd worked the ranch for 12 years and knew better than to interrupt unless something was wrong. "Storm's getting worse," Rhett said flatly. "Tell the men to double-check the shelters. If we lose cattle tonight, we lose money." "Already done, sir." Marcus hesitated. "That's not why I'm here." Rhett turned slowly. Marcus stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable in that particular way men get when they're about to deliver news they know won't be welcome. "The Thornton family sent another letter." Rhett's jaw tightened. "Burn it." "They're persistent. I'll give them that. This is the 4th one this month. I don't care if it's the 40th. The answer is the same as it was the first time, the 10th time, and every time after that." Rhett's voice carried the flat finality of a door slamming shut. "Rebecca Thornton could be made of solid gold, and I still wouldn't marry her." Marcus shifted his weight. "Her father's saying he'll make it worth your while. Partnership opportunities, access to his railroad connections. His daughter is 22 years old and has the personality of wet cardboard. She smiles like she's trying to sell me a horse with 3 legs." Rhett crossed the room to pour himself a whiskey, the crystal decanter catching firelight. "And her father is a snake who's been trying to get his hands on my water rights for 5 years. You think I don't see what this is?" "I think half the territory sees what it is, sir. Doesn't mean they'll stop trying." Rhett downed the whiskey in one burning swallow. "They can try until they're blue in the face. I'm not interested in getting married. Not to Rebecca Thornton, not to any of the other pretty little vultures whose fathers think they can trade a daughter for a piece of my land." People are starting to talk. People are always talking. That's what people do when they don't have anything useful to occupy their time. Marcus didn't look convinced, but he was smart enough not to push. "There's one more thing. We got word from town. There's been some trouble with the Granger outfit. Fences cut on the northern border. Couple of our steers found on their side of the property line." Rhett's expression went very still. "Silas Granger." "His men, anyway. Can't prove it was him directly." "Don't need proof. That bastard's been circling this ranch like a vulture since the railroad talks started." Rhett set down his glass with controlled precision. "He thinks I'm vulnerable because I'm running this operation alone. No family, no partners, no—" He stopped himself. "Double the men on the northern perimeter. Anyone crosses that fence line, they get one warning, just one." Marcus nodded and left, pulling the door shut behind him. Alone again, Rhett returned to the window. The blizzard had intensified, turning the world into a churning mass of white and gray. Somewhere out there, his cattle were huddled against the storm. His men were checking shelters, securing gates, doing the 100 small tasks that kept an operation this size running through winter. And Rhett stood in his expensive house, surrounded by expensive things, watching the snowfall. He'd built all of this, every acre, every building, every fence post, as a monument to his own survival. Proof that a half-starved kid from nothing could become something the whole territory had to respect. But respect and fear weren't the same as belonging, and lately Rhett had started to notice the silence more than he used to. Not that it mattered. He'd learned his lesson about trust 10 years ago. Her name had been Catherine Monroe, and Rhett had been stupid enough to believe that what they had was real. He'd been 26, just starting to build his empire, pouring every dollar and drop of sweat into turning raw land into something profitable. Catherine had said she loved him, had talked about building a future together, had looked at him like he was more than just a useful set of hands and a strong back. Then James Whitmore came along. Whitmore was everything Rhett wasn't: educated, refined, connected, a politician with family money and social standing, the kind of man who wore suits that cost more than horses and never had dirt under his fingernails. When Whitmore started courting Catherine, Rhett had laughed it off. He'd believed what she told him, that she wasn't interested in some fancy city boy. Right up until the morning he rode into town and saw her boarding a train to Denver, Whitmore's ring on her finger. She'd left him a letter. 3 paragraphs about how sorry she was, how she couldn't live the kind of hard frontier life Rhett was offering, how she needed security and stability and things he couldn't provide. The last line still burned in his memory. I hope you understand that this is what's best for both of us. What's best? As if she'd done him a favor by ripping out his insides and leaving him bleeding in the dust. Rhett had burned the letter that same day. Then he'd spent the next 10 years making absolutely certain no woman would ever get close enough to do that again. The marriages he'd rejected weren't about romance. They were about business. Every single one. Fathers looking to merge their struggling operations with his successful one. Mothers hoping to secure their daughters' futures with a rich husband. Women who looked at Rhett and saw dollar signs instead of a person. Catherine had taught him that love was a transaction. These families were just more honest about the terms. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Rhett turned, irritated. I said I didn't want to be disturbed unless... The door opened and Marcus stepped inside. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a woman Rhett had never seen before, covered in snow and shaking from cold. Found her about a mile from the main gate, Marcus said quickly. Horse went lame in the storm. She would have frozen if Tommy hadn't spotted her when he did. Rhett's eyes narrowed. Who is she? Says her name is Elena Mercer. Marcus glanced at the woman. Says she's looking for work. Rhett studied her. Mid-30s, maybe. Thin in a way that spoke of missed meals rather than fashion. Her coat was patched in 3 places, her boots worn nearly through at the soles, dark hair plastered to her skull from melted snow, and her eyes, brown, steady, holding his gaze without flinching. Work, Rhett repeated flatly. In the middle of a blizzard, in the middle of nowhere. I was heading for the next town, the woman said. Her voice was rough, like she hadn't used it much recently. Storm came up faster than I expected. My horse stepped wrong about an hour ago. I've been walking since then. Walking? In this weather? Rhett crossed his arms. That's about the dumbest thing I've heard all week, and I've heard some pretty dumb things. Elena Mercer didn't look offended. She looked tired. Wasn't planning on the storm. Wasn't planning on the horse either. But here we are. Here we are, Rhett echoed. He turned to Marcus. Get her warmed up, give her some food, and put her in the bunkhouse until the storm passes. Tomorrow morning, give her $50 in directions to town. I don't need charity, Elena said sharply. Rhett raised an eyebrow. Then you're welcome to walk back out into the blizzard. I'm sure you'll make it another mile, maybe 2 before you freeze to death. But at least you'll die with your pride intact. For a long moment, she just looked at him. There was something in her expression Rhett couldn't quite read. Not anger, not gratitude, just a kind of flat assessment, like she was measuring him against some internal standard and finding him exactly what she expected. Thank you, she said finally. The words sounded like they cost her something. For the food and the shelter. I'll be gone in the morning. See that you are. Marcus led her out, leaving Rhett alone again with the storm and his whiskey. He poured himself another drink, irritated by the interruption. The last thing he needed was some desperate drifter showing up looking for handouts. The territory was full of people who'd come west thinking they could make easy money, only to discover that the frontier didn't hand out second chances. Still, something about the woman bothered him. Not the poverty. He'd seen plenty of that. It was the way she'd looked at him, direct, unflinching, like she'd seen worse than a rich rancher in a bad mood and wasn't particularly impressed. Rhett drained his glass and set it down harder than necessary. Tomorrow she'd be gone, and he could get back to the business of running his ranch in peace. The next morning, Elena Mercer didn't leave. Rhett discovered this when he walked into the kitchen at dawn to find her sitting at the work table, drinking coffee with Martha, the ranch's cook. Both women looked up when he entered, but only Martha looked nervous. "Mr. Calloway," Martha said quickly, "I was just making breakfast, I hope." Rhett's gaze shifted to Elena. "Thought you were leaving at first light." "Storm's still going," Elena said evenly. "Your foreman said it would be suicide to travel until it clears." Rhett looked out the window. She wasn't wrong. The blizzard had intensified overnight, turning the world into a solid wall of white. Nothing was moving out there except snow and wind. "Fine, stay until it passes." He grabbed a cup from the shelf and poured himself coffee. "But once it clears, you're gone." "Understood." Rhett sat down at the opposite end of the table, acutely aware that he never ate breakfast in the kitchen. He took his meals in the dining room, alone, while Martha delivered food on expensive china. Having someone else in the space felt wrong, like a violation of some unspoken rule. Elena didn't seem to notice his discomfort. She drank her coffee in silence, staring at nothing in particular. "So where were you headed?" Rhett asked, surprising himself. "Before the storm." "West. That's not very specific." "Wasn't trying to be." Rhett felt a flicker of irritation. Most people who show up at a stranger's ranch looking for shelter at least have the decency to make conversation. Elena's eyes met his. Most people who offer shelter don't act like it's a prison sentence. Martha made a small choking sound and suddenly became very interested in her biscuit dough. Rhett should have been angry. Should have thrown this ungrateful woman out into the snow and let her take her chances. Instead, he found himself almost smiling, a small, involuntary twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough," he said. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the wind howling outside and Martha's nervous humming as she worked. Finally, Elena spoke again. "I came from Nebraska. Husband died 8 months ago. Sold everything we had to pay his debts, which left me with about $30 and a lame horse. Been working my way west ever since, picking up jobs where I can find them." Rhett studied her face. "You don't sound too broken up about the husband." "I'm not?" "Most widows at least pretend to be sad." "I'm not most widows." Elena set down her cup. "My husband was a mean drunk who spent 15 years making my life miserable. When he finally rode his horse into a ravine while too drunk to see straight, I felt relieved. If that makes me a terrible person, so be it." The honesty was startling. Rhett was used to people lying to him, telling him what they thought he wanted to hear, flattering him, manipulating him. This woman looked him dead in the eye and told him she was glad her husband was dead. "Why go west?" he asked. "Why not? Nothing keeping me where I was. Figured I'd see how far I could get before the money ran out." She glanced around the kitchen. "Didn't plan on ending up at a cattle ranch in the middle of Wyoming, but here we are." "Here we are," Rhett repeated for the second time in 12 hours. Martha set plates in front of them, eggs, biscuits, bacon that crackled with grease. Elena ate like someone who didn't know when the next meal was coming, quick and efficient, no wasted motion. "You said you were looking for work," Rhett said. "What kind?" "Any kind. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, handle livestock. Worked a farm most of my life. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I don't break easy. I don't hire women for ranch work." "Didn't ask you to hire me. Asked if there was work." Elena wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "But if you're not interested, I'll move on once the storm clears. No hard feelings." Rhett should have left it there, should have finished his breakfast and walked away. Instead, he heard himself saying, "Martha's been complaining that she needs help with the winter preserves, and the bunkhouse could use a thorough cleaning before spring. If you're willing to do that kind of work, I'll pay you fairly and give you a place to stay until you're ready to move on." Elena's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "How much?" $2 a day plus room and board." $3. $2.50, and that's generous considering I'm also feeding you. Elena held out her hand. "Deal." Rhett shook it, her palm rough with calluses against his. The moment his skin touched hers, something electric shot up his arm. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. The sensation of touching someone who'd survived the same kind of grinding hardship he had. He let go quickly and stood up. Martha will show you what needs doing. Stay out of my way, and we'll get along fine. Wasn't planning on bothering you, Elena said. Rhett left the kitchen feeling unsettled in a way he couldn't quite name. Bog. The storm lasted 3 more days. During that time, Rhett found himself noticing Elena Mercer in ways that annoyed him. She worked quietly, efficiently, never complaining about the endless tasks Martha assigned her. She didn't try to make conversation with the ranch hands, didn't flirt or simper or do any of the things women usually did around him. She just worked. On the 4th morning, the storm finally broke. Rhett woke to sunlight streaming through his window and a silence so profound it felt almost holy. He dressed quickly and headed outside, needing to assess the damage. The ranch had fared better than he'd feared. Some fences were down, and they'd lost about 30 head of cattle, but considering how brutal the storm had been, it could have been much worse. His men were already out working, their breath puffing white in the frozen air. Marcus met him by the main barn. Could have been a lot worse, sir. Could have been better. Rhett surveyed the damage. Get the men started on fence repairs. I want everything secured before the next storm hits. Yes, sir. Marcus hesitated. That woman, Elena, she still here? Storm just cleared. She'll be leaving soon. Martha says she's a hard worker, says she finished 2 weeks of preserving work in 3 days. Rhett grunted noncommittally. I'm just saying, Marcus continued carefully, if you wanted to keep her on for a bit longer, wouldn't hurt anything. Martha could use the help and… Marcus. Yes, sir? I pay you to manage my ranch, not my household staff. If I want your opinion on domestic matters, I'll ask for it. Marcus nodded and walked away. Rhett stood in the snow, watching his men work, and told himself he was relieved Elena would be leaving. The last thing he needed was another complication in his carefully ordered life. He found her in the kitchen that afternoon, packing her few belongings into a canvas bag. Martha was protesting loudly. At least stay until spring, Martha was saying. The work's barely started, and I can't manage it all alone. You managed fine before I showed up, Elena said quietly. You'll manage fine after I leave. Rhett cleared his throat. Both women turned to look at him. Storm's cleared, he said unnecessarily. Roads should be passable by tomorrow. Then I'll leave tomorrow. Elena tied her bag shut. Thank you for the work and the shelter. She moved to walk past him, but Rhett found himself blocking the doorway. Where exactly are you planning to go? West, like I said. To do what? Elena's jaw tightened. I'll figure it out when I get there. That's not a plan. That's a good way to end up dead in a ditch somewhere. Not your problem. It will be my problem when someone finds your frozen corpse and traces you back to my ranch. Rhett crossed his arms. Stay through winter. Work for Martha. Come spring, I'll pay your passage to wherever you want to go and give you enough money to get started fresh. Elena stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Why would you do that? Because Martha needs help, and you're a hard worker. It's not charity, it's a business arrangement. Business, Elena repeated slowly. That's right. $3 a day, room and board through the end of March. After that, we're done. For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then, $4 a day. $3.50, and you stop trying to negotiate with me. Deal. After she left, Martha gave Rhett a look he chose to ignore. Don't, he said. I didn't say anything. You were thinking it loud enough. Martha smiled and went back to her work, humming something that sounded suspiciously like a wedding march. Rhett scowled and left the kitchen, telling himself this was purely practical. Nothing more. Mshib. February arrived with teeth bared and claws extended. Another massive storm hit the territory, this one bringing temperatures so cold that spit froze before it hit the ground. Rhett's men worked around the clock trying to keep cattle alive, breaking ice on water troughs, hauling feed through snowdrifts that reached the horses' bellies. And Elena Mercer kept working. Rhett started noticing small changes around the ranch house. The main room stayed warmer because someone, Elena, had figured out how to arrange the furniture to trap heat more efficiently. His clothes came back from washing cleaner than they'd been in years. The meals Martha served improved because Elena had quietly reorganized the pantry and introduced better systems for preserving food. She never asked for credit, never pointed out what she'd done, just worked day after day with that same quiet efficiency. It bothered Rhett more than it should have. One night in mid-February, he found himself in the kitchen again, something that was becoming a habit he didn't entirely understand. Elena was there alone, mending one of the ranch hand's torn shirts by lamplight. "Where's Martha?" he asked. "Gone to bed. She's been having trouble with her hip again." Elena didn't look up from her stitching. "I told her I'd finish this." Rhett poured himself coffee and sat down. "You don't have to do extra work. I'm paying you for 8 hours a day, not 16. Shirt needed mending. Didn't seem worth leaving it until morning." They sat in silence for a while. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked steadily. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said suddenly. "You just did." She smiled slightly, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Smart. Can I ask you something else?" "Depends on the question." "Why are you alone out here?" The directness of it caught Rhett off guard. "That's not really your business." "I know. That's why I asked if I could ask, instead of just asking." Rhett should have shut down the conversation right there. Instead, he found himself answering. "Because people are disappointing. They lie, they cheat, they take what they can get and leave you with nothing. It's easier to be alone." Elena tied off her thread and bit it clean. Easier isn't the same as better. Spoken like someone who's never been betrayed. "I was married to an abusive drunk for 15 years. You think I don't know about betrayal?" She held up the mended shirt, examining her work. "But I also know that turning bitter and shutting everyone out isn't the same as protecting yourself. It's just a different kind of prison." "That's a nice philosophy," Rhett said coldly. "Let me know how it works out for you." "Already has." "I'm still alive, aren't I? Still moving forward instead of hiding behind walls." Elena folded the shirt carefully. "You've built yourself a fortress out here, Mr. Calloway. Big house, big ranch, big reputation, but you're still alone inside it. That's not strength. That's fear." Rhett stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're angry at someone who's not here anymore. I know you're taking it out on everyone who gets too close. And I know that's going to destroy you eventually, no matter how rich you get." Elena met his eyes steadily. "I've seen it before. Hell, I lived with it for 15 years, and it never ends well." "We're done with this conversation." "We are," Elena agreed. She stood up, gathered her sewing supplies, and walked past him toward the door. Then she paused. "For what it's worth, I think whoever hurt you was an idiot. You're not an easy man, but you're a fair one. That counts for something." She left before Rhett could respond. He stood in the empty kitchen, hands clenched into fists, feeling like she'd reached into his chest and twisted something vital. The worst part was that she was right. Catherine had been gone for 10 years, and Rhett was still letting her control his life. Still using her betrayal as an excuse to keep everyone at arm's length. Still convinced that being alone was the same as being safe. He'd built his empire on spite and fury, and now he was trapped inside it. Rhett didn't sleep well that night. The thaw came in early March, turning the frozen Badlands into a muddy mess. The ranch exploded into activity. Fence repairs that had been delayed by weather, cattle that needed checking, 1,000 tasks that had piled up during the worst of winter. And through it all, Elena worked. Rhett found himself watching her more than he should. The way she moved efficiently through tasks. The way she spoke to the ranch hands, respectful but firm, never flirting, never trading on the fact that she was the only woman besides Martha on a ranch full of men. The way she handled herself with quiet confidence, like she'd learned long ago that the only person she could truly rely on was herself. She reminded him of someone, Rhett realized. She reminded him of himself. One afternoon, he found her in the barn, helping one of the younger hands with a horse that had thrown a shoe. The kid was struggling, clearly frustrated, and Elena was showing him the proper technique with patient hands. "No, like this," she was saying. "You have to support the weight here, or you'll throw out your back. Trust me, I learned that lesson the hard way." The kid, Tommy, 18 years old and still learning, nodded and tried again. This time, he got it right. "There you go," Elena said, stepping back. "See, not so hard once you get the feel for it." "Thanks, Mrs. Mercer." "Just Elena. I'm nobody's missus anymore, thank heavens." Rhett cleared his throat. Both of them turned. "Mr. Calloway," Tommy said quickly, "I was just finish up and then check the water troughs in the south pasture," Rhett said. "They were frozen this morning. Yes, sir. Tommy practically ran out of the barn. Elena wiped her hands on her skirt. Didn't mean to overstep. He was struggling, and I know horses. I noticed. Rhett walked deeper into the barn, running his hand along one of the stall doors. Martha says you're thinking about staying on through April. Maybe. Haven't decided yet. What's stopping you? Elena was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I don't know. I came out here planning to keep moving, keep running from everything behind me. But this place, she shook her head, it's the first place that's felt stable in a long time, and that scares me. Why? Because stable things can be taken away. I learned that the hard way, too. Rhett understood that fear intimately. It was the same fear that kept him from letting anyone get close, the same fear that had turned his ranch into a fortress. To stay, he heard himself saying. Through spring, through summer if you want. Martha needs the help, and you're good at what you do. Is this still a business arrangement? What else would it be? Elena smiled sadly. Nothing, I suppose, just making sure we're on the same page. She walked past him toward the barn doors, and Rhett caught the scent of soap and hay, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Something that made his chest feel tight. Elena, he called out. She stopped and turned. That thing you said about me being fair, did you mean it? Would I have said it if I didn't? Most people say things they don't mean all the time. I'm not most people. Elena held his gaze. You're fair and you're honest, and you're loyal to the people who work for you. Those are good qualities. The fact that you're also stubborn as hell and emotionally closed off doesn't change that. Emotionally closed off, Rhett repeated. If you want me to use prettier words, I can, but I figured you'd prefer honesty. Despite everything, Rhett laughed, a short, surprised bark of sound. You're something else, you know that? I've been called worse. She left him standing in the barn, shaking his head. For the first time in 10 years, Rhett Calloway found himself genuinely interested in another person. Not attracted, or at least not just attracted, interested. Curious about what she'd say next, how she'd react to things, what she thought about the world. It was terrifying. It was also, he realized, the most alive he'd felt in a decade. March slid into April, and Elena stayed. The ranch transformed with the changing season. Snow melted, revealing brown grass that would turn green within weeks. Cattle that had huddled together for warmth spread out across pastures. The air smelled like thawing earth and possibility. Rhett's carefully ordered world began shifting in ways he couldn't quite control. It started small. Elena joining him for coffee in the mornings before the ranch woke up. Conversations that started about work and drifted into other territory. Books they'd read, places they'd been, the strange cruelties and unexpected kindnesses of frontier life. She never pushed, never tried to pry information out of him or manipulate him into revealing things he didn't want to share. But somehow, in the quiet morning hours before the sun came up, Rhett found himself talking to her in ways he hadn't talked to anyone in years. He told her about arriving in Wyoming with nothing, about the first cattle operation he'd worked for, where the owner beat his men and cheated them on wages, about saving every penny for 3 years until he could buy his own land. She told him about growing up on a hardscrabble farm in Nebraska, about marrying young because it seemed like the only option, about the slow erosion of hope that came from living with someone who blamed her for every disappointment in his life. Did you ever fight back? Rhett asked one morning. Once. He broke 2 of my ribs and told me if I ever raised a hand to him again, he'd kill me. Elena stared into her coffee. I believed him, so I learned to survive instead of fight. Kept my head down, did what I was told, waited. For what? For him to drink himself to death, mostly, which he eventually did. She looked up. I know that makes me sound terrible. It makes you sound like someone who survived impossible circumstances the only way you could. Elena studied his face. You don't judge me for it? Why would I? You did what you had to do to stay alive. That's not weakness, it's strategy. Something shifted in her expression, a kind of relief Rhett recognized because he'd felt it himself in rare moments when someone understood the choices he'd made without condemning them. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing me as a person instead of a victim, for not assuming I'm broken just because bad things happen to me. You're not broken, Rhett said. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. The words hung between them, heavier than he'd intended. Elena broke the silence first. We should get to work. Daylight's burning. But she smiled as she said it, and Rhett found himself smiling back. The change didn't go unnoticed. Marcus mentioned it first, carefully, while they were checking fence lines in the northern pasture. You seem different lately, sir. Lighter, if that makes sense. Rhett kept his eyes on the fence. Don't know what you're talking about. I'm just saying, it's good to see you smiling more. The men have noticed too. The men should focus on their work instead of gossiping like old women. Marcus grinned. They do focus on their work. Doesn't mean they don't notice things. Elena's been good for this place. Good for you. Rhett's jaw tightened. It's not like that. Didn't say it was. I'm just making an observation. Observe less. But Marcus was right, and Rhett knew it. Elena had changed something fundamental about the ranch. Not just the physical improvements, though those were real, but something less tangible. The atmosphere. The feeling of the place. For 20 years, the Calloway Ranch had been a machine. Efficient, profitable, and cold as winter iron. Now it felt almost like a home. And that scared Rhett more than he wanted to admit, because homes could be lost. People could leave. And Rhett had built his entire life around never being vulnerable to that kind of pain again. Late one night in mid-April, he found Elena on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the chill, staring at the stars. Can't sleep? He asked. Never could, really. My husband used to say I thought too much. Probably the only thing he was right about. She glanced at him. What's your excuse? Same as yours, I guess. Too much thinking. Rhett sat down on the porch rail, a careful distance away from her. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like salt spilled on black cloth. I've been thinking about what you said, Elena spoke suddenly. About the choices I made. About survival versus fighting. What about it? You called it strategy. But sometimes I wonder if it was just cowardice. If I should have fought harder, left sooner, done something instead of just… She gestured vaguely. Enduring. You stayed alive, Rhett said firmly. That's not cowardice. That's victory. Doesn't always feel like victory. Victory rarely does. Usually it just feels like surviving long enough to face the next fight. Elena pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. Is that what your life feels like? One fight after another? Used to. Lately. Rhett stopped himself. Lately what? Lately it feels different. Less like fighting and more like… He couldn't find the words. Living? Elena suggested quietly. Maybe. They sat in silence, the night settling around them like a blanket. An owl called somewhere in the distance. The wind rustled through new grass. Rhett, Elena said, and it was the first time she'd used his first name. Why did you really ask me to stay? He could have lied, could have given her some practical answer about Martha needing help or the ranch requiring extra hands. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. Because you're the first person in 10 years who's looked at me and seen a human being instead of a bank account. Because you make me remember what it feels like to trust someone. Because… He stopped, the admission too raw. Because I'm tired of being alone. Elena turned to face him fully. In the starlight, her eyes were dark and fathomless. I'm scared, she said. Of what? Of this. Of you. Of caring about someone again and having it go wrong. Her voice shook slightly. I spent 15 years in hell because I trusted the wrong person. I swore I'd never let that happen again. I'm not your husband. I know. That's what scares me. Elena laughed, but it came out shaky. If you were terrible, this would be easy. I'd leave and never look back. But you're not terrible. You're difficult and stubborn and emotionally constipated, but you're also decent, and that makes everything complicated. Rhett stood up and crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. He stopped just short of touching her, close enough to see the rapid pulse in her throat. I don't know how to do this, he said roughly. I don't know how to let someone in without being terrified they'll destroy me. But I know I don't want you to leave, and I know that scares me more than anything I've faced in 20 years. What are we doing, Rhett? I don't know, but I want to find out. He cupped her face in his hands, rough palms against soft skin, and kissed her. Not gently, not carefully, but with all the pent-up loneliness and fear and desperate hope that had been building for weeks. Elena kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "This is a mistake," she whispered. "Probably. We're both terrible at this." "Definitely. I'm still scared." "Me too." Elena pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. "If we do this, if we try, you have to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll talk to me. Really talk. Not hide behind walls or pride or whatever it is you do when things get hard. Because I can't survive another relationship built on silence and bitterness." Rhett wanted to promise, wanted to tell her it would be easy. But he'd learned long ago that easy promises were worthless. "I'll try," he said instead. "That's all I can give you right now. But I'll try." Elena searched his face for a long moment. Then she nodded. "That's enough." She kissed him again, softer this time, and Rhett felt something in his chest crack open, some frozen part of himself he'd locked away 10 years ago, thinking he'd never need it again. It hurt. It also felt like coming home. News traveled fast in the Wyoming territory, and Rhett Calloway taking up with a woman, any woman, but especially a poor widow with no family and no social standing, was too good a story to ignore. By the end of April, half the territory was talking about it. The Thornton family responded first, with another letter expressing their extreme disappointment that Rhett had chosen to debase himself with someone so clearly beneath his station. Rhett burned that letter without bothering to read past the first paragraph. Other families followed suit, some politely withdrawing their daughters from consideration, others sending thinly veiled insults wrapped in formal language. Rhett ignored them all, but ignoring the gossip didn't make it disappear, and it definitely didn't stop Silas Granger from seeing an opportunity. The first sign of trouble came in early May, when 3 of Rhett's ranch hands quit on the same day. "Got better offers," was all they'd say before riding off. The second sign came a week later when Marcus discovered fresh fence cuts along the northern border, not accidental damage, but deliberate sabotage. "Granger's making his move," Marcus said grimly. Rhett stood looking at the cut fences, his jaw tight. "He thinks I'm distracted." "Are you?" "No, but he doesn't know that." Rhett turned to face his foreman. "Double the patrols. I want men on the borders around the clock. Anyone caught on my land who doesn't belong here gets one warning, then they get a bullet." "Yes, sir." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, if I may, you may not. People are saying you've gone soft, that you're vulnerable now because of Elena." "Let them say it. Granger's dangerous. He's been trying to get his hands on your water rights for years, and now he thinks, I know what he thinks." Rhett's voice was cold as January ice. "He thinks I've become weak because I care about someone. He thinks that makes me an easy target." "Does it?" Rhett smiled, sharp and predatory. He's about to find out exactly how wrong he is. Silas Granger wasn't a patient man, but he understood timing. He'd built his railroad fortune by knowing exactly when to strike and when to wait. And right now, watching Rhett Calloway stumble into what looked like genuine feelings for some nobody widow, the timing felt perfect. Granger sat in his office in Cheyenne, a room decorated with expensive furniture that didn't quite hide the fact that he'd grown up dirt poor in Ohio. His fingers drummed against the mahogany desk as he listened to his foreman, Pike, deliver the weekly report. "The fence cutting worked like you thought," Pike said. "Got 3 of his men to quit too. Offered them double wages to work for us instead." "Good. What about the woman?" "Elena Mercer, widow from Nebraska. Husband died last year, drunk, from what we hear. She showed up at Calloway's ranch during that big storm back in January, and apparently she never left." Granger leaned back in his chair. "Interesting. What's Calloway's weakness when it comes to her?" "Hard to say, sir. He's not exactly advertising the relationship, but the ranch hands talk, and from what we've gathered, he's different around her. Softer. Granger smiled. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Keep the pressure on. More fence cutting, more bribes, more disruption. I want Calloway distracted and off balance when I make my real move." "And what move is that, sir?" "The water rights. Those springs on his northern property are worth 10 times what his cattle operation brings in. Once the railroad pushes through next year, that land becomes crucial. Granger stood and walked to the window overlooking Cheyenne's main street. I've been trying to get him to sell for 5 years. He's always refused. But now he's got something he cares about more than spite. That changes the equation. Pike shifted his weight uncomfortably. Calloway's not going to just hand over the water rights, sir. Not even for a woman. He will if I give him the right incentive. Granger turned back to his foreman. Keep pushing. I want him desperate before summer hits. Desperate men make mistakes. Back at the Calloway ranch, Rhett was discovering that caring about someone again came with complications he'd forgotten existed. Elena had moved from the bunkhouse into the main house, not into his bedroom, not yet, but into one of the guest rooms that hadn't been used in years. The change was small but significant, and everyone noticed. Martha had opinions, which she shared liberally. People are talking, she said one morning while kneading bread dough with more force than necessary. Saying all kinds of things about you and Elena. Rhett poured himself coffee. People always talk. That's their primary occupation out here. This is different. The Thornton family is spreading rumors that Elena is a gold digger. Some of the other families are saying worse. Let them say whatever makes them feel important. Doesn't change anything. Martha stopped kneading and fixed him with a look. It changes things for Elena. She's the one who has to walk into town and face those whispers. She's the one they're calling names. Elena can handle herself. I know she can, but she shouldn't have to. Martha's expression softened. I like her, Rhett. She's good people. But if you're going to put her through this, you'd better be sure about what you're doing. Because if you're not serious about her, if this is just some temporary thing to fill the loneliness, then you're no better than those gossips making her life difficult. The words hit harder than Rhett expected. He set down his cup carefully. I'm serious. Are you? Because serious means more than just enjoying her company. It means standing by her when things get ugly. And things are going to get ugly, mark my words. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you've spent 10 years building walls to keep everyone out. Now you've let one person in, and I'm worried you don't actually know what to do with that. Rhett wanted to argue, but Martha had a point. He'd been so focused on allowing himself to feel something again that he hadn't thought through the practical implications. Elena was living in his house, which meant she was tied to his reputation now. His enemies were her enemies, his battles were her battles. And he hadn't asked if she was ready for that. He found Elena in his barn later that morning, brushing down one of the horses with steady, practiced strokes. She looked up when he entered, and the smile that crossed her face made something in his chest tighten. Morning, she said. Morning. Rhett leaned against the stall door. We need to talk. The smile faded. That's never a good way to start a conversation. Martha says people in town are talking, spreading rumors about you. Elena went back to brushing the horse. I know, I'm not deaf. It doesn't bother you? Of course it bothers me. But I survived 15 years of a man telling me I was worthless every single day. I think I can handle some strangers whispering behind my back. She paused, then added, Besides, it's not like the rumors are completely wrong. I am poor. I did show up at your ranch with nothing, and I am involved with you now, which technically makes me someone who's benefiting from your money. That's not, I know what it's not, but that's what it looks like from the outside, and you can't control what other people think. Elena set down the brush and turned to face him fully. If you're worried about your reputation, I can leave. Go back to traveling west like I planned. That's not what I want. Then what do you want, Rhett? Because you're standing there looking like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, and I can't tell if you're having second thoughts or if you're trying to protect me from something. Rhett ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I'm trying to make sure you understand what you're getting into. Being with me means dealing with enemies I've made over 20 years of building this ranch. It means being a target. I've got rivals who'd love nothing more than to hurt me by going after you. You think I don't know that? Elena's voice was sharp. You think I'm naive enough to believe this would be easy? I'm not some sheltered girl who's never seen how cruel people can be. I know exactly what I'm risking. Then why stay? Because, for the first time in my entire life, I'm with someone who sees me as an equal instead of property. Because you're honest with me, even when it's uncomfortable. Because when I look at you, I see someone who understands what it's like to survive the worst and keep going. She stepped closer. I'm not staying because of your money or your ranch or your reputation. I'm staying because of you. And if you can't trust that, then maybe we are making a mistake. Rhett grabbed her hand before she could turn away. I trust you. It's myself I don't trust. I don't know how to do this without screwing it up. Nobody knows how to do it perfectly. We're both learning. Elena squeezed his hand. But we have to actually talk to each other instead of you retreating into brooding silence every time something gets complicated. That was the deal, remember? I remember. Then stop protecting me from things I can handle and start treating me like a partner. A partner, Rhett repeated. Yes. Someone who's in this with you, not someone you need to shield from reality. Elena's expression was fierce. I've been handling reality my whole life. I don't need you to shelter me from it now. Rhett pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. She fit against him in a way that felt both foreign and completely right. I'm going to mess this up, he said quietly. Probably. I will too. But at least we'll mess it up together. They stood like that for a long moment. The only sounds the horse shifting in the stall and the wind whistling through gaps in the barn walls. Then Elena pulled back and looked up at him. So what's really bothering you? Because this isn't just about town gossip. Rhett told her about the fence cutting, the men quitting, the clear signs that Granger was making his move. He's testing me, Rhett said, seeing how I react, how distracted I am. And how are you going to react? By making it very clear that distracted doesn't mean weak. Rhett's expression hardened. Granger wants my water rights. He's wanted them for years. Now he thinks having you here makes me vulnerable, which means he's going to push harder. What can I do to help? Rhett started to say nothing, then remembered what she'd said about treating her like a partner. Keep your eyes open. Report anything unusual you see or hear, and stay armed when you're away from the house. Elena nodded. I can do that. I'm serious about the gun. Granger's not above hiring men who'd hurt a woman to make a point. I said I can do it, Rhett. I know how to shoot. My father taught me before I was 10, and my husband... She stopped, her jaw tightening. My husband made sure I remembered. Trust me, I can handle a gun. There was a story there, Rhett knew, another piece of pain she carried. But before he could ask, Marcus appeared in the barn doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got another problem. What now? Cattle. Someone drove about 50 head through a break in the fence last night. They're mixed in with what looks like Granger's herd about 3 miles north. Rhett swore under his breath. He's trying to provoke me into a confrontation on his land. Looks that way. What do you want to do? Nothing. Not yet. Rhett turned to Elena. This conversation isn't over. I know. He kissed her quickly and followed Marcus out of the barn, his mind already working through options and strategies. Granger was escalating, which meant Rhett needed to be smarter, not just angrier. The next 2 weeks brought a steady escalation of trouble. More fence cuts. More cattle mysteriously wandering onto Granger's property. 2 more ranch hands quit, and when Rhett tried to hire replacements from town, he discovered that Granger had already approached every available worker and offered them better wages not to work for Calloway. It was calculated harassment designed to drain Rhett's resources and patience. And it was working. Rhett found himself spending 16-hour days riding fence lines, repairing damage, and trying to keep his operation running with fewer men than he needed. He came home exhausted and frustrated, barely able to hold a conversation before collapsing into bed. Elena watched it happen with growing concern. She tried to help where she could, organizing the household to run more efficiently, taking over tasks that would normally require one of the men, even riding out to check on things herself despite Rhett's objections. You're going to work yourself into an early grave, she told him one night when he stumbled in well past midnight, covered in mud from fixing another broken fence. Don't have much choice. Rhett stripped off his filthy shirt and dropped into a chair. Granger's not letting up, and I can't afford to show weakness. This isn't strength, Rhett. This is stubbornness. Elena brought him a plate of food Martha had kept warm. You need more men. Why not hire from the next county over? Already tried. Word's spread. Nobody wants to work for a boss who might be in the middle of a range war. Then what's your plan? Keep going until you collapse? Rhett ate mechanically, too tired to taste the food. My plan is to outlast him. Granger's spending money on this harassment campaign. Eventually he'll realize it's not working and he'll have to try something else. And what if something else is worse? Then I'll deal with it when it happens. Elena knelt down in front of him, forcing him to look at her. Talk to me. Really talk. What aren't you saying? Rhett set down his fork. I'm saying that Granger's not going to stop. He wants this land, and he's going to keep pushing until either I sell or something breaks. And I'm worried that the thing that breaks is going to be you. Me? You're the obvious target. The way to hurt me without directly confronting me. Rhett's hands clenched into fists. If he goes after you, then I'll handle it. Elena, no, listen to me. I understand you're worried, but treating me like I'm made of glass isn't going to protect me. It's just going to make me less prepared when trouble actually comes. She stood up. I've survived worse than Silas Granger. I'll survive this too. Your husband was one man. Granger has money and men and no conscience about using either. My husband was a monster who controlled every aspect of my life for 15 years. I learned how to survive by being smarter than him, by paying attention, by never letting my guard down even when I was exhausted. Elena's voice was steady but hard. I'm not helpless, and I'm not stupid. Stop treating me like I am. They stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Finally, Rhett stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. I'm sorry, he said quietly. You're right. I'm just scared. I know. So am I. Elena came to stand beside him. But we can't let fear make us turn on each other. That's exactly what Granger wants. Rhett turned to look at her, and the worry in his eyes was so raw it made her chest ache. I can't lose you. Then don't push me away trying to protect me. He pulled her into his arms, holding on maybe a little too tight. Elena let him, understanding that sometimes people needed to hold on to something solid when the world was shifting under their feet. We'll figure this out, she said against his chest. Together. Together, Rhett agreed. But even as he said it, he was already planning, already thinking about how to hit back at Granger without putting Elena at risk, already calculating angles and weaknesses. Because Rhett Calloway hadn't built his empire by playing defense. And Silas Granger was about to learn what happened when you backed a predator into a corner. The opportunity came 3 days later in the form of information from an unexpected source. One of the ranch hands, a kid named Danny who'd only been working for Rhett for 6 months, came to him looking nervous. Mr. Calloway, can I talk to you? Private-like? Rhett led him into the barn, away from the other workers. What's on your mind, Danny? It's about Mr. Granger, sir, about what he's been doing. I'm listening. Danny twisted his hat in his hands. My cousin works for Granger, has for about 2 years now. He came to see me last night, and he was drunk and talking about things maybe he shouldn't have been talking about. What kind of things? About how Granger's planning to make a big move soon. Something about forcing you to sell by making it impossible for you to get your cattle to market. He's been bribing the railroad officials, getting them to delay your shipments, charge you extra fees, basically price you out of being able to turn a profit. Rhett felt his jaw tighten. The railroad was his lifeline. Without it, he couldn't move cattle to the eastern markets where they fetched premium prices. If Granger had corrupted that connection, he could slowly bleed Rhett dry without ever firing a shot. Did your cousin say anything else? He said Granger's got some kind of backup plan involving the woman you're with. Didn't give details, but he laughed about it like it was something real clever. Danny looked up, his young face worried. I know I'm just a hand, sir, and maybe it's not my place to say, but you've been fair to me. Fairer than most bosses. I thought you should know. Rhett clapped him on the shoulder. You did the right thing. And Danny? Don't mention this to anyone else. Not the other hands, not your cousin, nobody. Understood? Yes, sir. After Danny left, Rhett stood in the barn for a long time, thinking. The railroad corruption was bad but not unexpected. Granger had those kinds of connections. The mention of Elena was more concerning. What kind of backup plan involved her? He needed more information, which meant he needed to be smarter about gathering intelligence. And for that, he needed help from someone Granger wouldn't expect. That evening, he found Elena in the kitchen going over supply lists with Martha. Can I borrow you for a minute? He asked. Elena followed him into his study, a room she'd only been in a handful of times. It was all dark wood and leather, masculine and slightly intimidating. What's going on? She asked. Rhett closed the door and told her what Danny had reported. Elena's expression grew progressively darker as he talked. So he's trying to strangle your business, she said when he finished. Looks that way. And he's got something planned involving you, though I don't know what yet. What do you need me to do? Rhett had been thinking about this all afternoon. I need you to go into town, talk to people. Women talk to women differently than they talk to men, and you might hear things I can't. You want me to spy. I want you to listen. There's a difference. Elena was quiet for a moment. You trust me to do this? I trust you to be smart and careful, which is different than wrapping you in cotton and hiding you away. Rhett met her eyes. Martha goes into town twice a week for supplies. Go with her tomorrow. Talk to the shopkeepers, the other women. See what you can learn about Granger's movements, his plans, anything unusual. And if people are hostile, you said the gossip about me is pretty vicious. Then you smile and ignore them. You're tougher than they are. You've already proven that. Elena nodded slowly. All right, I'll go. And Elena, take the derringer I gave you. Keep it on you at all times. She smiled slightly. Already planning on it. The next morning, Elena climbed onto the wagon beside Martha, feeling more nervous than she wanted to admit. She'd been avoiding town since moving into Rhett's house, not wanting to face the whispers and stares. Now she was riding straight into them, deliberately seeking out the very people who'd been calling her names. The ride into town took about an hour. Martha kept up a steady stream of conversation, clearly trying to distract Elena from her nerves. Don't let them get to you, Martha said as the first buildings came into view. Most of them are just jealous. They spent years trying to get their hooks into Rhett, and you managed it without even trying. I didn't manage anything. It just happened. I know that. You know that. They don't care. Martha guided the wagon toward the general store. Remember, you're not doing anything wrong. You're a widow who found work and happened to fall for her employer. It's a tale as old as time, and there's nothing shameful about it. Elena nodded, but her stomach still felt tight as they climbed down from the wagon. The general store was run by a middle-aged couple, the Harrisons. Mr. Harrison greeted them with professional courtesy, but Mrs. Harrison's smile was strained. Mrs. Freeman, she said to Martha, using Martha's married name from her long-deceased husband. What can I help you with today? Just the usual supplies, Helen? Oh, and this is Elena Mercer. She's been helping me out at the ranch. I've heard. Mrs. Harrison's tone was carefully neutral, but her eyes raked over Elena like she was evaluating livestock. Welcome to town, Mrs. Mercer. Thank you, Elena said evenly. While Martha went over her supply list with Mr. Harrison, Elena wandered the store, pretending to browse while actually listening to the other customers. Two women were discussing fabric patterns in hushed tones, but their conversation stopped abruptly when they noticed Elena nearby. She moved to the next aisle, where an older woman was examining jars of preserves. Excuse me, Elena said politely. I'm looking for good canning supplies. Would you recommend this brand? The woman looked up, surprised. Oh, yes, they're quite good. I use them myself. Thank you. I'm Elena Mercer, by the way. I know who you are. The woman's expression was guarded, but not hostile. I'm Mrs. Patterson. My husband runs the feed store down the street. It's nice to meet you. They made small talk about canning for a few minutes, and Elena was starting to think this might not be as bad as she'd feared when Mrs. Patterson said, Can I ask you something? And I mean no offense by it. Of course. Is it true? About you and Mr. Calloway? Elena had prepared for this question. Mr. Calloway has been very kind to me. I work at his ranch, and yes, we've become close. People are saying all sorts of things, that you're after his money, that you're manipulating him. People will say what they want to say. I can't control that. Elena met the older woman's eyes. But I can tell you that I've never asked Mr. Calloway for anything except honest work for honest pay. Whatever's developed between us happened naturally, and it's nobody's business but ours. Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Good for you. Half the women in this town have been throwing themselves at that man for years, and he's never given any of them the time of day. If he chose you, there must be a good reason. I'd like to think so. Just be careful, dear. Silas Granger's been sniffing around, asking questions about you, about where you came from, who your people are. That man doesn't ask questions unless he's planning something. Elena's pulse quickened. What kind of questions? About your husband, mostly. How he died? What kind of man he was. Mrs. Patterson lowered her voice. My husband does business with some of Granger's men. They've been talking about you quite a bit lately. Nothing good, I'm afraid. I appreciate the warning. Just watch yourself. Granger's a snake, and snakes strike when you least expect it. Elena thanked her and moved on, her mind racing. So Granger was investigating her background. Why? What did he think he'd find? She spent the next hour moving through town, talking to shopkeepers and other women, gathering fragments of information. Most people were wary of her. Some were outright hostile, but a few, like Mrs. Patterson, seemed sympathetic or at least curious. By the time she and Martha loaded up the wagon for the trip home, Elena had learned several useful things. Granger had been in town 3 times in the past 2 weeks, which was unusual. He'd been meeting with the railroad officials and several of the prominent ranchers, and he'd definitely been asking about Elena's past. "You did well," Martha said as they headed back toward the ranch. "I saw you talking to people. Get anything useful?" "Maybe. I need to talk to Rhett." Back at the ranch, Elena found Rhett in his study, going over ledgers. She told him everything she'd learned. "He's digging into your past," Rhett said grimly, "looking for leverage. But there's nothing to find. I was married to a drunk who died in an accident. That's not exactly scandalous. Depends on how he spins it." Rhett leaned back in his chair. "If he can make it look like you're hiding something or that your husband's death was suspicious, he can use that to damage both our reputations. My husband's death wasn't suspicious. He was drunk. His horse threw him. He fell into a ravine and broke his neck. There were witnesses. Then we need to make sure those witnesses are available to testify to that if necessary." Rhett stood up and began pacing. "I'll send someone to Nebraska to gather documentation. Death certificate, witness statements, anything that proves your story." "You believe me, don't you?" Rhett stopped and looked at her. "Of course I believe you. But this isn't about belief, it's about proof. Granger's going to try to create doubt, and the best defense against that is having documentation that backs up everything you've said." Elena nodded, understanding the logic, even if it stung a little. "What about the railroad situation?" "I'm working on that. I've got contacts in Denver who might be able to help, but it's going to take time." He crossed to her and took her hands. "I know this is a lot. I know you didn't sign up for any of this." "Actually, I did. You told me being with you meant dealing with your enemies. I said I could handle it." Elena squeezed his hands. "I meant it. You're something else. You know that?" "You've mentioned it before." He pulled her close and kissed her, slow and deep. And for a moment, Elena let herself forget about Granger and rumors and the complicated mess their lives had become. For a moment, it was just the two of them, and that was enough. The moment was shattered by Marcus bursting through the study door without knocking. "Sorry, sir, but we've got a real problem. Fire in the south pasture. Big one." Rhett was moving before Marcus finished speaking, Elena right behind him. They ran outside to see smoke billowing up from the direction of the southern grazing lands, black and thick against the late afternoon sky. "How did it start?" Rhett demanded as he grabbed his horse's reins. "Don't know yet. Wind's pushing it toward the main herd. If we don't stop it, get every available man down there, now." Rhett swung into the saddle. "Elena, stay here. Like hell I will. You need all the help you can get." There wasn't time to argue. Rhett took off at a gallop with Marcus, and Elena ran to saddle her own horse, her heart pounding. By the time she reached the fire, it had spread across a 1/4 mile of grassland, flames leaping 30 feet high and consuming everything in their path. The ranch hands were trying to create a fire break, beating at the flames with wet blankets and shovels, but it was clear they were losing ground. The wind kept shifting, pushing the fire in new directions faster than they could react. Elena grabbed a shovel and joined the line of men digging a trench to stop the fire's advance. The heat was incredible, making her eyes water and her lungs burn. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking. "It's no good," one of the men shouted. "We can't dig fast enough." Rhett was everywhere at once, directing men, making split-second decisions, working harder than anyone. His face was black with soot, his hands bleeding from the shovel handle. "We need to drive the cattle north," he yelled over the roar of the flames. "If the fire reaches them..." An explosion cut him off. Everyone turned to see flames engulfing one of the supply sheds near the pasture. "There were lamp oil cans in there," Marcus said, horror dawning on his face. "If the fire reaches the other sheds..." More explosions followed, each one sending debris flying and starting new fires. Within minutes, what had been a contained emergency became a full-scale disaster. "This wasn't an accident," Rhett said, his voice deadly calm despite the chaos. "Someone set this deliberately. Multiple ignition points." Elena looked at him, understanding flooding through her. "Granger, has to be. This is too coordinated to be natural." Another shed exploded, and Elena watched pieces of burning wood arc through the air like fireworks. One landed dangerously close to where they stood. "We need to fall back," Marcus was shouting. "It's too dangerous." But Rhett wasn't retreating. He was staring at the flames with an expression Elena had never seen before, pure, cold fury. "No," he said quietly, "we're not running. We're ending this." He turned to the men. "Forget the fire breaks. We're doing a backburn. Marcus, take 10 men and start a controlled burn from the creek bed north. We'll meet it from this side. We trap the main fire between two lines and let it burn itself out." "That's insane," one of the hands protested. "We could lose control of both fires." "We're already losing control of this one. At least this way we choose where the destruction happens." Rhett's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Anyone who doesn't want to risk it can head back to the bunkhouse. No judgment, but I'm not letting Granger burn my ranch to the ground without a fight." Nobody moved toward the bunkhouse. "All right then." Rhett looked at Elena. "You should—" "Don't even say it. I'm staying." For a second she thought he'd argue. Then he nodded once, sharply, and they got to work. The next 3 hours were the longest of Elena's life. Setting the backburn was terrifying. Deliberately lighting more fire when they were already surrounded by flames felt like madness. But Rhett knew what he was doing, and slowly, impossibly, the plan started to work. The two fire lines met in a massive conflagration that lit up the night sky like a small sun. Then, with nothing left to burn, the flames began to die down. By the time the last embers were smothered, it was well past midnight. Rhett's ranch hands collapsed where they stood, too exhausted to even walk back to the bunkhouse. The entire south pasture was blackened wasteland. 3 supply sheds were destroyed, and they'd lost an unknown number of cattle. But the ranch itself still stood. Elena found Rhett sitting on the ground near the creek, staring at the smoking ruins. His hands were blistered and bleeding, his clothes were burned in places, and there was a nasty cut on his forehead that was still seeping blood. She sat down beside him without speaking. "He tried to burn me out," Rhett said finally. His voice was hoarse from smoke. "Just tried to destroy everything I've built." "But he didn't succeed. Not this time. But he'll try again. And again. Until something breaks." Elena took his damaged hands in hers, ignoring the blood and blisters. "Then we'll stop him. Permanently." Rhett looked at her, and in the dim moonlight, his eyes were hollow. "I've been thinking about that. About what it would take to really stop someone like Granger. And I don't know if I can do what needs to be done without becoming exactly like him." "You're nothing like him. You sure about that? Because right now, sitting here looking at what he did, all I can think about is hurting him, making him pay, destroying him the way he tried to destroy me." Rhett's jaw tightened. "That's not righteousness, that's revenge." "Sometimes revenge is just another word for justice." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "He tried to burn your ranch. He's been harassing you for months. He's plotting something against me. At what point do you get to fight back without it being wrong?" "I don't know." They sat in silence, surrounded by the smell of smoke and destruction. In the distance, some of the men were starting to move, checking on the cattle that had survived, beginning the long process of assessment and cleanup. "We should get you cleaned up," Elena said finally. "Those hands need bandaging." "In a minute." "Rhett," I said in a minute. His voice wasn't harsh, just tired. "Let me sit here for one more minute before I have to figure out what comes next." So Elena sat with him in the ruins of his south pasture, holding his bloody hands, and waited for dawn. When the sun finally rose, painting the blackened landscape in shades of gold and orange, Rhett stood up. His expression had changed, the hollow exhaustion replaced by something harder, more determined. "He wants a war," Rhett said quietly. "Then that's what he'll get." Elena stood beside him, looking at the destruction, and knew that everything was about to change. The man who'd spent 10 years building walls around his heart had finally found something worth tearing them down for. And heaven help anyone who stood in his way. The letter arrived 2 days after the fire, delivered by a rider Rhett didn't recognize. It was sealed with red wax stamped with Granger's initials, like the man thought he was some kind of European lord instead of a railroad opportunist from Ohio. Rhett broke the seal and read it standing in his burned-out pasture, Elena beside him watching his face grow progressively darker. "What does it say?" she asked. He handed it to her without speaking. The letter was brief and to the point. Granger was offering to buy Rhett's water rights for what he called a generous price, about a third of what they were actually worth. The letter expressed sympathy about the unfortunate fire and suggested that perhaps now Rhett would reconsider his previous refusals. It was signed with elaborate flourishes that probably took longer to write than the actual message. "He's not even pretending he didn't do it," Elena said, fury coloring her voice. "He burned your land and then sent you a business proposal like it's all perfectly normal." That's how men like Granger operate. They create the crisis and then offer themselves as the solution. Rhett took the letter back and stared at it. "He thinks I'm desperate now, thinks the fire broke something in me." "Did it?" "No. It just clarified things." Rhett folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. "I've been playing defense this whole time, trying to protect what I have. That was a mistake. You can't win by just defending. Eventually something gets through. So what are you going to do?" "Go on offense. Hit him where it hurts." Rhett turned to look at the blackened landscape. "But first, I need to shore up what's left here and make sure we can survive whatever comes next." Over the following week, Rhett worked with an intensity that worried Elena. He was up before dawn and didn't stop until well after dark, organizing repairs, meeting with contractors, sending telegrams to contacts in Denver and Cheyenne. He barely ate, barely slept, and refused to talk about anything except the immediate practical matters at hand. Marcus pulled Elena aside on the fourth day. "He's going to work himself to death," the foreman said bluntly. "I've known Rhett Calloway for 12 years, and I've never seen him like this. He's angry and scared, though he'd never admit it. He's more than angry. He's planning something, and I don't think it's going to be legal." Marcus lowered his voice. "I heard him talking to some men from Denver yesterday. Rough types. The kind you hire when you need things done quietly." Elena felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of things?" "That's what worries me. I don't know." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Look, I understand wanting to hit back at Granger. The man deserves it, but if Rhett crosses certain lines, there's no coming back from that, and I don't want to see him destroy himself trying to destroy someone else. I'll talk to him. Good luck." He's not exactly in a listening mood. Elena found Rhett in his study that evening, surrounded by papers and maps. He looked up when she entered, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. "You need to eat something," she said, setting down a plate Martha had prepared. "Not hungry." "I don't care. Eat anyway." She sat down across from him. "Marcus says you've been talking to men from Denver." Rhett's expression didn't change. "Marcus talks too much. He's worried about you. So am I." "Don't be. I know what I'm doing." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're about to do something stupid and dangerous." "Stupid would be sitting here and letting Granger pick me apart piece by piece." Rhett pushed away from the desk and stood up, pacing to the window. "He burned my land, Elena. Could have killed my men. Could have killed you. And now he sends me a letter acting like it's just business, like there are no consequences for what he did." "So you're going to give him consequences?" "Yes." "What kind?" Rhett was quiet for a long moment. "The kind that make him understand he picked the wrong target." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're going to get right now." Elena stood up and crossed to him, forcing him to look at her. "Remember what you promised me? That you'd talk to me instead of retreating behind walls. That's what you're doing right now. This is different." "How?" "Because what I'm planning, if you knew the details, it would make you complicit, and I won't do that to you." Rhett's voice was rough. "Bad enough I've dragged you into this mess. I'm not making you an accessory to what comes next. You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose to be here. You chose to be with me. You didn't choose to be part of a range war. They're the same thing now, whether you like it or not." Elena grabbed his face with both hands, making him meet her eyes. "You can't protect me by shutting me out. That's not how this works." "Then how does it work?" "Because I'm doing the best I can here, and it doesn't feel like enough." The raw vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in Elena's chest. This was the man beneath the armor, scared, angry, and trying desperately to keep everyone safe while his world burned down around him. "You include me," she said firmly. "You tell me what you're planning, and we figure out together if it's worth the risk. You don't get to make these decisions alone anymore." "What if I don't want that responsibility? What if I'm better off just making the hard calls myself?" "Then you're not the man I thought you were." Elena dropped her hands. "I told you I could handle reality, but I can't handle being treated like a child who needs to be protected from the truth. If we're partners, we're partners. That means the ugly parts too." Rhett closed his eyes. "I've hired men to sabotage Granger's railroad operations, specifically to delay shipments and create logistical nightmares that will cost him money and credibility with his investors. That's illegal. Yes. And dangerous. Yes. And you think it'll work?" Rhett opened his eyes, surprised. "You're not going to try to talk me out of it? Would it do any good?" "Probably not." Elena sat back down, thinking. Granger's been doing the same thing to you. Sabotage, harassment, making it impossible for you to operate normally. You're just returning the favor. That's one way to look at it. What's the other way? That I'm stooping to his level, becoming the kind of man I've always despised. Rhett returned to his desk, slumping into the chair. "I built this ranch by being smarter and working harder than everyone else, not by playing dirty. You also built it in a different time. Things have changed. Granger's changed the rules." Elena leaned forward. "I'm not saying you should compromise everything you believe in, but there's a difference between having principles and being naive. And right now, being naive is going to get you killed." "When did you get so practical about morality?" "When I survived 15 years with a monster by learning that sometimes the right thing and the safe thing aren't the same." Elena's voice was steady. "I'm not proud of every choice I made to stay alive, but I'm alive, and that counts for something." Rhett studied her face. "You really think this is the right move?" "I think it's a move. And standing still right now is worse than taking a risk." She paused. "But I also think you need to be smart about it. If this gets traced back to you, see, it won't. The men I hired are professionals. They don't know who's paying them, and they don't care as long as the money's good." "Nothing's that clean, Rhett. There's always a trail." "Then I'll make sure it leads somewhere else." They sat in heavy silence for a while. Finally, Elena spoke again. "There's something else we need to talk about, something Mrs. Patterson told me in town." She relayed what the woman had said about Granger investigating Elena's background, asking questions about her dead husband. "I've been thinking about it," Elena continued, "and I can't figure out what he's looking for. My husband was a drunk. He died drunk. That's not exactly scandalous. Half the men in the territory have drinking problems. Unless Granger's trying to make it scandalous." Rhett's mind was already working through possibilities. "What if he's planning to suggest your husband's death wasn't an accident, that you were somehow involved?" Elena's face went pale. "That's insane. There were witnesses. The sheriff ruled it an accident." "Which sheriff? Where?" "In Fairbury. That's where we were living when he died." "Small town?" "Tiny. About 300 people." Rhett stood up and began pacing again. "Here's what Granger's probably thinking. He finds some way to cast doubt on your story. Bribes a witness to change their testimony, or finds some detail that looks suspicious when taken out of context. Then he spreads the rumor that you're a black widow who murdered her husband for—" He stopped. "Did your husband have any money when he died?" "No, we were broke. That's why I had to sell everything." "Then he'll say you did it for freedom or revenge or any number of reasons. Doesn't matter if it's true. All that matters is creating enough doubt to make you look dangerous or untrustworthy. And then what? Even if people believe it, how does that help him? It gives him leverage. He goes to you privately and says he'll make the rumors go away if you leave me. Or he uses it to pressure me, suggests that maybe I should reconsider his offer if I don't want my woman investigated for murder." Elena felt sick. "That's twisted. That's effective. Granger's smart enough to know he can't beat me in a straight fight. So he's looking for indirect approaches. Ways to apply pressure without exposing himself to direct retaliation." Rhett stopped pacing and looked at her. "Which is why I need you to write down everything you remember about your husband's death. Every detail, no matter how small. Then I'm sending someone to Nebraska to gather documentation and lock down witness statements before Granger can get to them." "You really think he'd go that far?" I think a man who's willing to burn down a ranch with people on it is willing to do just about anything. Rhett's expression was grim. We're not dealing with someone who has limits, Elena. The sooner you accept that, the better. Elena spent the next several hours writing down everything she could remember about her husband's death. It wasn't pleasant, dredging up memories she'd worked hard to bury, but she forced herself to be thorough and honest. James Mercer had been a mean drunk, but he'd also been a careless one. The night he died, he'd spent 6 hours at the local saloon drinking away money they didn't have. When he'd finally stumbled out around midnight, he'd insisted on riding home despite being barely able to stand. 3 men had witnessed him mounting his horse. 2 of them had tried to convince him to walk, but James had cursed them out and spurred the horse into a gallop. The ravine was about 2 miles from town, a deep cut in the landscape where a creek ran during wet seasons. James's horse had either stumbled or simply thrown him when he pulled too hard on the reins. Either way, he'd gone over the edge and landed 30 feet down on rocks in shallow water. By the time anyone found him the next morning, he'd been dead for hours. The sheriff had investigated. There'd been an inquest. Everyone agreed it was a tragic accident caused by drunkenness and poor judgment. Elena had buried him in the local cemetery and tried to move on with her life. Now Granger was trying to turn that tragedy into a weapon. When she finished writing, Elena took the pages to Rhett. He read through them carefully, asking occasional questions for clarification. "This is good," he said finally. "Detailed. I'll get this to my contact in Denver tomorrow, and he'll head to Nebraska within the week. How much is this going to cost?" "Don't worry about that." "Rhett, I said don't worry about it. This is my problem as much as yours." He set down the pages. "Besides, Granger made it my problem when he decided to target you." Elena wanted to argue, but the exhaustion was catching up with her. "I'm going to bed. You should too." "Soon." "Rhett, I promise. Just needs to finish a few things here." Elena left him in the study, knowing he probably wouldn't sleep for hours yet. The man was running on fumes and stubborn determination, and sooner or later something was going to break. She just hoped it wouldn't be him. The next 2 weeks brought an uneasy stalemate. Rhett's sabotage operations began bearing fruit. Granger's railroad shipments started experiencing mysterious delays and equipment failures. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to be expensive and embarrassing. At the same time, Rhett shored up his own defenses, hiring additional security and implementing new protocols for protecting the ranch. Elena threw herself into helping wherever she could. She worked with Martha to create emergency supply caches hidden around the property. She practiced with her derringer until she could draw and fire in under 3 seconds. She memorized the layout of the ranch and the locations of all the escape routes Rhett had established. She also kept watching Rhett, worried about the toll this was taking on him. He smiled less, talked less, spent more and more time alone in his study, planning and scheming and preparing for a confrontation that felt inevitable. One night, Elena woke to find his side of the bed empty. She found him on the porch, staring out at the darkness. "Can't sleep?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool night air. "Too much to think about." She sat down beside him. "Want to talk about it?" "Not particularly." They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Rhett spoke. "I keep thinking about what comes after this. Assuming we win, assuming Granger backs down or destroys himself, or whatever needs to happen for this to be over. What then?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've spent 20 years building this ranch, making it bigger, richer, more powerful, and for what? So I could sit alone in an expensive house and congratulate myself on winning?" He shook his head. "The fire made me realize something. All of this, the land, the cattle, the money, it can all disappear in an afternoon. But you," he turned to look at her, "you stayed. When the fire was burning, and it would have been smarter to run, you stayed and fought beside me." "Of course I did." "It's not of course. Most people would have run. Hell, most people would have left the minute things got dangerous." Rhett took her hand. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm grateful for it every day." Elena squeezed his hand. "You know what I think? I think we both spent so long surviving alone that we forgot what it's like to have someone actually choose to stay. Not because they need something from us, but because they want to." "Is that what you're doing? Choosing to stay?" "Every single day." She leaned her head on his shoulder. even when you're being impossible, even when you're planning illegal sabotage operations, even when you're so stubborn you won't sleep or eat properly. I'm not that bad. You're exactly that bad. But you're also brave and loyal, and you care about your people even when you pretend not to. That's worth putting up with the stubbornness. Rhett was quiet for a moment, then, "Marry me." Elena's head jerked up. "What?" "Marry me. Not because it makes sense politically or financially or any of the other practical reasons people get married. Marry me because I love you, and I don't want to spend another day without making it official." "Rhett, I know the timing's terrible. I know we're in the middle of a war with Granger and everything's uncertain, but that's exactly why I'm asking now. Because if there's one thing this whole mess has taught me, it's that waiting for the perfect moment is stupid. The perfect moment doesn't exist. There's just now, and what we choose to do with it." Elena stared at him, her heart pounding. "You really mean this?" "I've never meant anything more in my life. We barely know each other. It's been less than 6 months. I know you survived 15 years of hell and came out stronger. I know you're brave enough to stand beside me when everyone else would run. I know you make me want to be better than I am." Rhett cupped her face in his hands. "What else do I need to know?" Elena felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "This is crazy." "Probably. People will say I'm marrying you for your money. Let them say it. We'll know the truth. Granger will use it against us somehow." "Granger's already using everything he can against us. This doesn't change that." Elena laughed, the sound shaky. "You're supposed to have a ring for this, you know, and maybe get down on one knee." "I'll get you a ring tomorrow. As for the knee..." Rhett slid off the porch step and knelt in front of her, his face serious despite the absurdity of the position. "Elena Mercer, will you marry me?" She looked down at him, this difficult, stubborn, impossible man who'd somehow broken through all her defenses and made her believe in something again. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Rhett stood up and pulled her into his arms, kissing her hard enough to make her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "We're insane," Elena said. "Completely. This is going to make everything more complicated." "I know. Granger's going to lose his mind." "Good. Let him." Rhett grinned, and it was the first genuine smile Elena had seen from him in weeks. "I want him to know that he failed. That all his scheming and sabotage and intimidation didn't break us, it just made us stronger." "When do you want to do this? The wedding, I mean?" "As soon as possible, this week if we can arrange it." "This week?" Elena pulled back. "Rhett, that's... I know it's fast, but I don't see the point in waiting. Do you?" Elena thought about it. Thought about all the reasons she should say no, should insist on a longer engagement, should be practical and careful. Then she thought about James Mercer and the 15 years she'd wasted being practical and careful in a marriage that slowly killed her spirit. "No," she said finally. "I don't see the point in waiting either." They were married 3 days later in a small ceremony at the ranch. Marcus served as witness, along with Martha and a handful of the ranch hands Rhett trusted most. There was no fancy dress, no elaborate decorations, no crowd of well-wishers. Just two people making promises to each other while standing in front of a traveling preacher Marcus had located in the next county. Elena wore a simple blue dress Martha had helped her alter. Rhett wore his best suit, the one he usually saved for business meetings in Cheyenne. The whole ceremony took less than 15 minutes. When the preacher pronounced them married, Rhett kissed her like he was claiming something precious and declaring war at the same time. The ranch hands cheered. Martha cried. Marcus looked simultaneously happy and worried, which Elena was starting to realize was his natural state. They spent their wedding night in Rhett's bedroom, their bedroom now, and for a few hours managed to forget about Granger and fires and all the dangers waiting outside their door. But morning came, as it always does, and with it came a messenger from town. Granger knew about the wedding, and he was making his move. The messenger was Tommy, the young ranch hand, and he was out of breath from riding hard. Mr. Calloway, Mr. and Mrs. Calloway, there's trouble in town. Big trouble." Rhett was already reaching for his gun belt. "What kind of trouble?" "Granger's there with about 20 men. He's calling you out. Says he wants to meet face to face to settle things like civilized people before this gets any worse." Tommy swallowed hard. He's at the saloon, and he's making it real clear he's not leaving until you show up. It's a trap, Elena said immediately. Of course it's a trap. Rhett finished buckling his gun belt. But I can't ignore it either. If I don't show up, I look weak. And weak is the one thing I can't afford to be right now. Then we go together. No. Rhett, I said no. This is exactly what he wants, to get both of us in a public place where he controls the situation. Rhett turned to Marcus, who'd appeared in the doorway. Get the men ready. I want 10 riders, all armed, all people we trust absolutely. We're going to town. And me? Elena asked. You stay here where it's safe. We've been through this. You don't get to make these decisions alone anymore. This is different. This is, what? More dangerous? More important? Elena stepped closer. Or is it that you're scared something will happen to me and you're trying to protect me again? Rhett's jaw tightened. All of the above. Too bad. I'm going. Elena, we're married now, remember? That means we face things together. Isn't that what you said? I didn't mean facing down a psychopath with 20 armed men. Then you should have been more specific in your vows. Elena grabbed her coat. I'm going, Rhett. You can argue with me all the way to town, but you're wasting time that could be spent preparing. For a moment, she thought he'd actually try to stop her physically. Then he closed his eyes and let out a long breath. Fine, but you stay behind me at all times, and if shooting starts, you get to cover immediately. Understood? Understood. 20 minutes later, they rode toward town with 10 armed ranch hands. The morning was clear and cold, the kind of day that felt like it should bring good news instead of confrontation. Elena rode beside Rhett, very aware of the derringer in her pocket and the rifle strapped to her saddle. She'd meant what she said about facing things together, but that didn't mean she wasn't terrified. What do you think he wants? She asked quietly. Same thing he's always wanted, my water rights, but now he's going to try to leverage the wedding somehow. Probably threaten you to pressure me. And if he does, then I'll make it very clear what happens to men who threaten my wife. The word wife still felt strange and wonderful. Elena held on to that feeling as they approached town, using it to push back against the fear. The main street was eerily empty when they arrived. Townspeople had apparently decided to stay indoors rather than get caught in whatever was about to happen. The only signs of life were the horses tied up outside the saloon, at least 20 of them, just like Tommy had said. Rhett pulled his horse to a stop about 50 yards from the saloon. His men fanned out behind him, hands near their weapons. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the saloon door swung open and Silas Granger walked out. He was younger than Elena had expected, maybe 45, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and the kind of face that probably looked friendly when he smiled. Right now, he wasn't smiling. Calloway, he called out. Took you long enough. I'm here now. Say what you came to say. Not very friendly. And here I heard you just got married. Congratulations, by the way. Though I have to say it's quite sudden. Almost like you're trying to make a point. My marriage is none of your business. Isn't it? See, that's where we disagree. Granger walked a few steps closer, his hands visible and empty. When you marry a woman with a questionable past, it becomes everyone's business. Especially when that woman might be a murderer. Elena felt Rhett tense beside her. Careful what you say next. Oh, I'm being very careful. I've been very careful about investigating Mrs. Calloway's background. Or should I say, Mrs. Mercer. That was her name before, wasn't it? Before her husband died under such tragic, some might say suspicious, circumstances. My husband died in an accident, Elena said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. There was an inquest. It was ruled accidental death. Was it? Because I have a witness who says otherwise. Granger smiled. A man who was at the saloon that night. Who says you and your husband had a terrible fight earlier that day. That you threatened to kill him if he didn't stop drinking. That's a lie. Is it? Or is it just an inconvenient truth you'd rather keep buried? Granger's smile widened. I also have documents suggesting your husband had a life insurance policy. One that paid out quite nicely after his death. There was no insurance policy. Then you won't mind if we investigate further, officially, with the territorial marshal. Granger pulled a folded paper from his coat. I've already filed a complaint. The marshal will be here within the week to look into the matter. Rhett's horse shifted, responding to his rider's tension. What do you want, Granger? I want what I've always wanted, your water rights. Sell them to me for a fair price, and this whole unfortunate investigation goes away. Mrs. Calloway gets to keep her freedom, you get to keep your reputation, and we all move on with our lives. And if I refuse, then the investigation proceeds. Your wife gets arrested for murder. Even if she's eventually cleared, which is far from certain, the scandal will destroy you both. No one in the territory will do business with a man married to a suspected killer. Granger shrugged. It's your choice, the water rights or your wife's freedom. Elena felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. This was worse than she'd imagined. Granger hadn't just manufactured evidence. He'd created an entire legal case designed to trap them both. Before Rhett could respond, Elena urged her horse forward. Don't, Rhett said sharply, but she ignored him. She rode until she was close enough to see the smug satisfaction in Granger's eyes. Then she dismounted and walked right up to him, close enough that he had to take a step back. You want to know the truth about my husband's death? She said, her voice carrying across the empty street. Fine, here it is. James Mercer was a violent drunk who spent 15 years beating me and destroying everything good in our lives. The night he died, yes, we fought, because he'd spent our last money on whiskey and I dared to complain about it. He hit me, like he always did, and I told him I wished he was dead. She could feel Rhett behind her, could sense his tension, but she didn't stop. Then he went to the saloon and got so drunk he could barely walk. And when he rode home that night, his horse threw him, and he died in a ravine. Was I sorry? No. Was I relieved? Yes. Did I kill him? Elena stepped even closer to Granger. No, but you already know that. Because this isn't about justice. It's about leverage. It's about terrorizing people into giving you what you want. Careful, Mrs. Calloway. That sounds very close to slander. It's not slander if it's true. And everyone here knows it's true. Elena turned to address the few townspeople who'd started gathering to watch. Silas Granger burned Rhett Calloway's land because he wanted to force a sale. He's been harassing and sabotaging the ranch for months. And now he's manufacturing a murder charge because threats and violence weren't enough. You have no proof of any of that, Granger said, but his smile had slipped slightly. Don't I? Elena reached into her coat and pulled out a folded document. This is a sworn statement from one of your own employees, a man named Pike who got drunk 2 nights ago and confessed to his brother, who happens to work for a lawyer in Cheyenne, that you paid him to set the fire on Calloway land. That was a lie. Elena didn't have any such document, but she'd learned from 15 years with James that sometimes you had to bluff when you didn't have any other cards to play. Granger's face went still. That's impossible. Is it? Because I can ride to Cheyenne right now and file it with the territorial court. Let's see who ends up arrested by the marshal. She held up the blank paper, praying he couldn't see it was just a supply list she'd grabbed from Martha's kitchen. So here's my counteroffer. You drop this ridiculous murder investigation, you stop harassing the Calloway Ranch, and you leave the territory. Do that, and I won't file these documents. Refuse, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. The silence stretched out painfully. Elena could feel her heart hammering, could feel sweat trickling down her back despite the cold morning air. Then Granger laughed. You're bluffing. That paper is blank. You sure about that? You willing to bet your reputation on it? I don't have to bet, I just have to... He lunged for the paper faster than Elena expected. She jerked back, but he caught her wrist, yanking her forward. That's when Rhett's gun cleared leather. Let her go. The sound of 20 hammers being cocked filled the air as Granger's men drew their weapons. Rhett's ranch hands did the same. Suddenly, everyone was armed and pointing guns at everyone else. Granger still held Elena's wrist, his face twisted with fury. You think you can threaten me in my own town? This isn't your town, Rhett said calmly. And you're going to let go of my wife right now, or I'm going to put a bullet through your skull. There are 20 guns pointed at you. There are 10 pointed at you. I like my odds better. Rhett's voice was ice cold. Last chance, Granger. Let her go. For a frozen moment, it seemed like blood was inevitable. Then a new voice cut through the tension. Everyone lower your weapons, now. A man stepped out from behind one of the buildings, older, wearing a badge, and carrying a rifle with casual confidence. Marshal Hendricks, Granger said, trying to smile. Perfect timing. I was just about to file charges against... I said lower your weapons. All of you. This is getting out of hand. The marshal walked into the center of the standoff, apparently unconcerned about the forest of gun barrels. "Mr. Granger, let go of the lady." Granger released Elena's wrist. She stepped back quickly, returning to Rhett's side. "Now," the marshal continued, "somebody want to tell me what's going on here before this whole street turns into a graveyard?" Granger started talking fast, spinning his version of events. The marshal listened impassively, then turned to Rhett. "Your side?" Rhett gave a much shorter, more factual account. When he finished, the marshal looked at Elena. "And you, ma'am?" Elena told him everything: the fire, the harassment, the manufactured murder charge. She didn't mention the bluff about Pike's confession, but she made it clear what kind of man Granger was. When everyone had spoken, the marshal was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "Here's what's going to happen. Everyone's going to holster their weapons and go home. Mr. Granger, I'll investigate your claims about Mrs. Calloway, but I'll be doing it properly and officially. If there's no real evidence, and I suspect there isn't, the case gets dropped. As for the fire and the harassment, those are serious allegations that I'll also be investigating." "But," Granger started, "I'm not done. While I'm investigating, there will be no more violence, no more threats, and no more middle-of-the-street standoffs. Anyone who breaks that rule answers to me. Understood?" Everyone nodded reluctantly. "Good. Now get out of my sight before I arrest the whole lot of you for disturbing the peace." The crowd dispersed slowly, everyone keeping their hands visible and their movements careful. Elena found herself shaking as the adrenaline wore off. Rhett pulled her close. "That was the bravest, stupidest thing I've ever seen. I had to do something. He was going to destroy us." "You could have been killed." "So could you." Elena looked up at him. "We're in this together, remember?" "Together," Rhett agreed. Then, quietly, "Were you really bluffing about that document?" "Completely. It was Martha's grocery list." Despite everything, Rhett laughed. "You're something else. You've mentioned that before." They rode back to the ranch surrounded by armed men, knowing the confrontation had solved nothing. Granger was still out there, still dangerous, still determined to take what he wanted. But for the first time, Elena felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. Because the woman who'd spent 15 years surviving had finally learned how to fight back. And she wasn't alone anymore. The marshal's investigation bought them exactly 4 days of peace. 4 days where Granger kept his men off Calloway land and Rhett could breathe without constantly watching for the next attack. 4 days that felt like holding your breath underwater, knowing you had to surface eventually. On the 5th day, everything went to hell. It started with Danny riding in at dawn, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. Rhett was already up, checking fence repairs with Marcus, when the kid practically fell out of his saddle. "They took her," Danny gasped. "They took Mrs. Patterson." Rhett felt his blood go cold. "What? Who took her?" "Granger's men. I was in town early, helping my uncle with a delivery, and I saw it happen. 3 men grabbed her right outside the feed store, threw her in a wagon, and took off heading east." "Why would they take Mrs. Patterson?" Marcus asked, confused. But Rhett already knew. Mrs. Patterson was the woman who'd warned Elena about Granger's questions, the woman who'd been kind when everyone else was hostile. And now Granger had her. "It's a message," Rhett said, his jaw tight. "He's showing us what happens to people who help us." Elena appeared from the house, pulling a shawl around her shoulders. "What's happened?" Rhett told her, watching her face go pale. "We have to get her back," Elena said immediately. "It's a trap. He wants us to come after her." "I don't care if it's a trap. We can't just leave her." Elena's voice was fierce. "She helped us, Rhett. She warned me about Granger when she didn't have to. We owe her. We owe her our lives if we're stupid enough to ride into whatever ambush Granger's set up. Then we're smart about it. But we don't abandon her." Rhett wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the tactical reasons why rescuing Mrs. Patterson was suicide. But looking at Elena's face, he knew she was right. They couldn't leave someone to suffer because she'd shown them kindness. "Marcus, get every man we trust. Full weapons. We ride in 20 minutes. Rhett turned to Elena. "You're staying here." "No, I'm not." "Elena, don't. We've been through this too many times. She helped me, which means this is my responsibility too." Elena's expression brooked no argument. "I'm going." 23 minutes later, they rode out with 15 armed men. Danny had given them the direction, east toward the canyon country, where the land broke up into ravines and blind turns. Perfect ambush territory. He's not even trying to hide it, Marcus muttered as they rode. This is so obviously a trap, it's insulting. Doesn't mean we have a choice, Rhett said. They found the wagon about 6 miles from town, abandoned at the edge of a narrow canyon. Fresh tracks led deeper into the rocky terrain. Rhett called a halt and studied the landscape. The canyon walls rose on both sides, creating a natural funnel. Anyone following those tracks would be exposed and vulnerable. We can't all go in, he said. Marcus, take 8 men and circle around to the north rim. See if you can get above them. Tommy, you and 4 others stay here with the horses and watch our backs. The rest of you are with me. And me, Elena added. Rhett looked at her, knowing argument was useless. Stay close, stay behind cover. And if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. No arguments, she agreed, though they both knew it was a lie. They moved into the canyon on foot, weapons ready. The walls amplified every sound, boot steps on stone, the rustle of clothing, someone's nervous breathing. Rhett's senses were screaming that this was wrong, that they were walking into exactly what Granger wanted, but he couldn't see another option. The tracks led them deeper into the canyon, winding between rock formations that created countless hiding spots. Every shadow could conceal a gunman. Every turn could be the last one. They found Mrs. Patterson tied to a wooden post in a small clearing about half a mile in. She was conscious but terrified, a gag in her mouth and rope around her wrists. It's too easy, one of the ranch hands whispered. I know, Rhett said, but we're already here. He motioned for 2 men to move forward and free her. They'd made it halfway across the clearing when the shooting started. Gunfire erupted from the canyon walls, above, behind, from 3 sides at once. Bullets ricocheted off stone, filling the air with the whine of metal and rock fragments. One of Rhett's men went down immediately, clutching his leg. Cover! Rhett shouted, pulling Elena behind a boulder as bullets chewed up the ground where they'd been standing. The clearing became chaos. Rhett's men returned fire, but they were pinned down, exposed, exactly where Granger wanted them. The 2 men who'd gone for Mrs. Patterson were trapped in the open, unable to move without getting shot. We have to get them out of there, Elena shouted over the gunfire. We can't reach them without... An explosion cut him off. One of the canyon walls erupted in fire and smoke as someone set off dynamite, sending rocks cascading down. The blast was close enough that Rhett felt the heat, close enough that debris rained around them. They're trying to bury us. Marcus's voice came from somewhere above. He'd made it to the rim with his men and was firing down at Granger's shooters, but there were too many of them. Another explosion. This one brought down a section of the trail behind them, cutting off their retreat. Rhett made a decision. Covering fire, now! His men opened up, pouring bullets at the canyon walls. In that brief window, Rhett ran for Mrs. Patterson. Bullets kicked up dust around his feet. Something tugged at his shoulder, too close. He reached the post, cut Mrs. Patterson's ropes with his knife, and pulled her toward cover. They almost made it. The bullet hit Rhett in the side, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, like someone had shoved a hot poker through his ribs. Rhett! Elena's scream cut through the chaos. He tried to stand, but his leg wouldn't cooperate. Blood was spreading across his shirt, warm and wet. One of his men grabbed Mrs. Patterson and dragged her to safety while another provided covering fire. Then Elena was there, ignoring the bullets, ignoring everything except getting to him. She grabbed him under the arms and started pulling him toward the rocks. Leave me, Rhett gasped. Get yourself out. Shut up and move. Somehow they made it to cover. Rhett collapsed against a boulder, pressing his hand to his side and feeling blood seep between his fingers. The wound wasn't immediately fatal, but it was bad. Real bad. How many more of them are there? Elena asked one of the ranch hands, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. At least 20, maybe more. The man, Jake, one of the older hands, checked his ammunition. We're outnumbered and trapped. This isn't looking good, Mrs. Calloway. Elena looked around at their position. They had cover, but they were pinned down. The explosions had cut off retreat. Marcus and his men were fighting from above, but they couldn't get down to help without exposing themselves. And Rhett was bleeding. We need a distraction, she said, something that draws their fire away long enough for us to move. What kind of distraction? Elena was already moving, checking the men who'd made it to cover. 6 of them, plus her and Rhett. Mrs. Patterson was huddled against a rock, shaking but unharmed. Not great odds. Above them, she could see Marcus and his men trading shots with Granger's shooters. The canyon walls created a deadly crossfire, with Rhett's group caught in the middle. "How much dynamite do they have?" she asked Jake. "Don't know. They've used 3 charges so far." "Then we use it against them." Elena grabbed Rhett's rifle from where it had fallen. "When they set off the next charge, that's when we move. The explosion will cover the sound, and the smoke will give us concealment." "That's assuming we survive the explosion," Jake pointed out. "You have a better idea?" She didn't wait for an answer. She crawled to where she could see more of the canyon layout, studying the terrain with desperate focus. There, about 30 yards to the left, was a deeper section of the ravine, with better cover and a route that might let them work their way back toward the entrance. Another explosion rocked the canyon, this one bringing down more rock from the opposite wall. The blast was deafening, and for a moment Elena couldn't hear anything except ringing in her ears. But she'd been right about the smoke and confusion. In that brief window, she made her decision. "Move, now! Everyone toward that ravine!" The men looked at Rhett, who nodded despite the pain etched in his face. "Do what she says." They moved in a ragged group, half carrying Rhett, Mrs. Patterson stumbling along between 2 ranch hands. Bullets still flew, but the smoke from the explosion gave them precious seconds of concealment. They made it to the ravine and found it did indeed offer better cover. Deeper walls, multiple routes, harder for Granger's men to pin them down. Elena helped ease Rhett against a rock wall and pressed her shawl to his wound. "Stay with me. You hear me? Stay with me." "Not planning on going anywhere," Rhett said, but his voice was weak. Above them, the gunfire continued. Marcus's group was still fighting, but they were running low on ammunition. This couldn't last much longer. "We need to end this," Elena said. "Now, before someone else gets killed." "How?" Jake asked. "We're still outnumbered, still trapped." Elena looked at Mrs. Patterson. "Where were they keeping you before they brought you here?" A cabin. About a mile east. There were men there, lots of them. And Granger." Mrs. Patterson's voice shook. "He was giving orders, planning something." "Planning what?" "I don't know. But he was angry. Said something about burning you out for good this time. Said he was tired of playing games." Elena's blood ran cold. "He's going to attack the ranch. While we're trapped here, he's going to hit the ranch with whatever men he has left." Rhett tried to sit up, gasped in pain. "Martha, the other hands, they're not prepared for a full assault." "Which is exactly what Granger wants. Keep us pinned down here while he destroys everything you've built." Elena made a decision. "Jake, take 3 men and get out of this canyon however you can. Ride hard for the ranch and warn them. Get everyone armed and ready." "What about you?" "We'll keep Granger's men busy here. Give you time to get away." "Mrs. Calloway, with all respect, that's suicide. It's the only play we have." Elena looked at each of the men. "The ranch is what matters. The people there are what matters. We hold here, you save them. That's the deal." One of the younger hands spoke up. "I know another way out. There's a crack in the east wall, leads to a dry creek bed. It's narrow, but a man on foot could make it." "Then that's your route. Go, now." The 4 men moved quickly, disappearing into the maze of rocks. Elena watched them go and prayed they'd make it. "That was a good call," Rhett said quietly. "Tactical, smart. I'm learning from the best." Elena reloaded her Derringer, 2 shots, all she had. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been shot, but I'll live, probably." He grabbed her hand. "Elena, if this goes wrong, it's not going wrong. If it does, I need you to know, hey, stop. I know. I've always known." She kissed him quickly. "Now save your strength. We've got work to do." The gunfire from above had slackened. Marcus's group was either out of ammunition or out of time. Elena could hear shouting, Granger's men calling to each other, coordinating their next move. They had maybe 5 minutes before the final assault. "How many bullets do we have left?" she asked the 2 remaining ranch hands. "I've got 8, said one. 6, said the other. "Rhett, 4 in the rifle, 2 in my pistol." Elena did the math. 22 bullets between them against at least a dozen men. Probably more, plus her two-shot Derringer. Well, she said, we'd better make them count. The attack came 3 minutes later. Granger's men rushed the ravine from 2 directions, confident in their numbers. They weren't expecting organized resistance from a group they thought was beaten. Elena's first shot took down the lead man on the left. Her second caught another in the shoulder. Then she was reaching for Rhett's rifle, firing, working the lever action, firing again. Beside her, the ranch hands fought with desperate efficiency. They knew the ranch was at stake, knew their friends and Martha were in danger. That knowledge made them dangerous. The fight was brutal and close. At one point, a man made it into the ravine and Elena had to club him with the empty rifle. Another got close enough that Rhett shot him with his pistol from where he lay bleeding against the wall. Then, impossibly, the pressure eased. The attackers fell back, regrouping. "We hurt them," one of the ranch hands said, surprise in his voice. "Not enough." Elena was breathing hard, her hands shaking from adrenaline. "They'll come again, and we're almost out of ammunition." She was right. 5 minutes later, they came again. This time Elena's rifle clicked empty after 3 shots. She drew her Derringer, knowing she had 2 bullets left and nowhere near enough targets. The ranch hand next to her went down, blood spreading from a wound in his chest. The other was fighting with his knife, having run out of bullets entirely. This was it. This was how it ended. Then gunfire erupted from behind the attackers. Different guns, different shooters. Elena looked up to see Marcus and his men charging down from the canyon rim, and behind them, incredibly, was the marshal with a dozen deputized townsmen. Granger's men broke and ran. Some threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Others tried to fight and were quickly overwhelmed. In less than 2 minutes, it was over. Marshal Hendricks approached the ravine, his face grim. "Mrs. Calloway, Mr. Calloway, you two have a talent for finding trouble." "Marshal." Elena's legs suddenly felt weak, adrenaline turning to exhaustion. "How did you—" "Your men ran into me on the road. Told me what happened." He looked around at the carnage. "Where's Granger?" "He wasn't here. Sent his men to do the dirty work while he—" Elena's eyes widened. "The ranch. He's hitting the ranch. Already handled. Soon as your men told me, I sent half my deputies ahead with them." Hendricks knelt beside Rhett, examining his wound. "This needs a doctor. We'll get you back to town." "The ranch," Rhett insisted, trying to stand and failing, "is being defended by 12 armed deputies and your remaining ranch hands. Granger's not getting through." The marshal stood up. "Now let me do my job and get you medical attention before you bleed out from stubbornness." They made it back to town by late afternoon, Rhett barely conscious from blood loss. The doctor, a nervous man named Fletcher, worked on him for 2 hours while Elena paced outside, still covered in blood and dust, refusing to leave. Martha had arrived from the ranch with news. Granger had indeed attacked with about 15 men, but the deputies and ranch hands had held them off. 3 of Granger's men were dead, 5 more captured. The rest had scattered. As for Granger himself, he'd been found in his cabin by the marshal's men trying to destroy documents. He was currently in jail, facing charges of arson, attempted murder, kidnapping, and about a dozen other crimes. "It's over," Martha said, gripping Elena's hands. "It's actually over." Elena wanted to believe her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that things were never really over. That men like Granger always had one more move, one more trick. The doctor emerged from his office, wiping blood from his hands. "He'll live. Lost a lot of blood, and the bullet cracked a rib, but he'll live. Tough man, your husband. Can I see him? He's asking for you, but keep it brief. He needs rest." Elena found Rhett propped up in a bed, his torso wrapped in bandages. His face was pale, but his eyes were alert. "Hey," he said. "Hey yourself." Elena sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "You scared me. That makes 2 of us. When I saw you running into gunfire, I was returning the favor. You ran into gunfire for Mrs. Patterson." "That's different." "How?" "Because I'm supposed to protect you, not the other way around." Elena took his hand. "We protect each other. That's how this works, remember?" Rhett was quiet for a moment. "You saved everyone today. The ranch, the people, me. You made the right calls when I couldn't. I learned from watching you." "No, that was all you." He squeezed her hand weakly. I spent 20 years building walls and fighting alone. Then you showed up and taught me that strength isn't the same as isolation, that trusting people doesn't make you weak. Took you long enough to figure that out? I'm a slow learner. Rhett's eyes were drifting closed. Stay until I fall asleep? I'm not going anywhere. I'm not. She sat with him until his breathing evened out and his grip on her hand loosened. Then she stayed longer, just watching him breathe, reminding herself that he was alive. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Wyoming territory. Somewhere, Silas Granger sat in a jail cell, his empire collapsing around him. The marshal was questioning prisoners and building a case that would put him away for years. The next morning, Elena returned to the ranch with Martha. The damage from Granger's final attack was real but manageable. Some broken windows, bullet holes in the barn, one supply shed that had caught fire before the deputies put it out. But the ranch still stood. The people were safe, and for the first time in months, there was no immediate threat hanging over them. The ranch hands gathered in the main yard as Elena and Martha arrived. They looked tired, some were bandaged, but they were whole. "Ma'am," Marcus said, stepping forward, "we wanted to thank you for yesterday, for making the calls that saved us. You don't need to thank me. We're all in this together. Still, you could have run, could have saved yourself and left us to figure it out, but you didn't." He glanced at the other men, who nodded agreement. That counts for something, counts for a lot. Elena felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, all of you, for fighting, for standing with us." Over the next week, Rhett recovered slowly. The marshal's investigation revealed the full extent of Granger's corruption: bribes, extortion, arson, attempted murder. The railroad company severed ties with him immediately. His investors fled. The empire he'd built on fear and manipulation came apart like wet paper. Rhett's contact in Denver returned from Nebraska with documentation proving Elena's husband had died exactly as she'd said: a drunken accident, witnessed and documented. The false witnesses Granger had tried to buy recanted under pressure, admitting they'd been paid to lie. By the time Rhett was well enough to leave town, Granger's fate was sealed. He'd spend the next 20 years in territorial prison if he survived that long. On their first night back at the ranch, Elena and Rhett sat on the porch watching the sunset. His ribs still hurt and he moved carefully, but he was healing. "So," Elena said, "we survived." "Apparently." Rhett leaned back gingerly, "though I'm not entirely sure how." "Stubbornness and a little bit of luck. A lot of luck." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about what comes next. About the ranch, the land, all of it." And I don't want to spend the rest of my life just accumulating more. More land, more cattle, more money. What's the point if it's just me sitting alone counting my assets?" Elena smiled. "It's not just you anymore." "I know. That's what I mean." Rhett turned to look at her. "I want to build something different. Not just a ranch, but a community. Open up some of this land to families who need it. Create something that lasts beyond just us." That's a big change from the man who wouldn't let anyone past his gates. People change. Or maybe they just finally become who they were supposed to be all along. He took her hand. "You changed me, Elena. Made me remember what it's like to trust someone, to build something with someone instead of alone. You changed me too. Made me remember I could be strong without being alone. That letting someone in doesn't mean giving up who I am." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned purple and orange, the endless Wyoming landscape spreading out before them. Somewhere out there, other ranchers were settling in for the night. Other families were building their lives. Other people were surviving and fighting and loving. And here, on the Calloway ranch that had once been a fortress of isolation, two people who'd learned to survive alone were learning how to live together. It wasn't perfect. Rhett was still stubborn, still prone to making decisions without consulting anyone. Elena still had nightmares about her years with James, still flinched sometimes at loud noises. They argued about money, about ranch operations, about 1,000 small things, but they also laughed together, worked together, built something together that was stronger than what either of them could have created alone. The winter that had brought them together had passed. Spring was coming, bringing new grass and new cattle and new possibilities. And for the first time in their lives, Both Rhett and Elena looked toward the future with something other than fear or resignation. They looked toward it with hope. Spring arrived 3 months later with the kind of gentleness that felt earned after such a brutal winter. The burned sections of the south pasture showed the first hints of new grass pushing through blackened soil. The fences were rebuilt, stronger than before. The supply sheds that had been destroyed now stood as fresh lumber, still smelling of pine sap and possibility. Rhett stood at the edge of what used to be the burn zone, his ribs still aching when the weather changed but otherwise healed. Beside him, Elena watched as a dozen families set up temporary camps on land Rhett had parceled out for settlement. "You sure about this?" she asked. "That's a lot of your land you're giving away." "Not giving. Leasing for fair terms. There's a difference." Rhett watched as a young couple struggled to erect a tent while their 2 small children ran circles around them. "Besides, what good is all this land if it's just me sitting on it?" The old Rhett Calloway wouldn't have said that. The old Rhett Calloway was an idiot who thought being alone was the same as being strong. He glanced at her. "Someone taught me better." The settlement project had been Elena's idea, born out of conversations about what they wanted the ranch to become. During Rhett's recovery, they'd spent long hours talking about the future, about legacy, about what mattered beyond just accumulation. Word had spread that Calloway was offering land to families willing to work it. Not the predatory terms most large ranchers offered, but actual fair deals, reasonable lease payments, water access, help getting started in exchange for labor on the main ranch when needed. Within 2 weeks, they'd had 30 families apply. Rhett had selected 12 to start, families that reminded him of himself at 17, desperate, hardworking, and just needing a chance. Marcus approached, his hat dusty from helping the settlers get organized. "The Johnsons are asking about building materials. They want to put up a permanent structure before winter. Tell them they can buy lumber at cost from our suppliers. And if they need help with construction, the ranch hands can pitch in on Sundays." Rhett paused. "Actually, make that an offer to all the families. We help each other out here." Marcus smiled. "You keep this up, people are going to start thinking you've gone soft. Let them think what they want." After Marcus left, Elena slipped her arm through Rhett's. "He's right, you know. You have changed. Is that a bad thing?" "No, it's just different. The man I met in January would have thrown me out into the blizzard without a second thought." "The man you met in January was an idiot," Rhett repeated. "Took me getting shot to finally figure out what actually matters." They walked back toward the main house, taking the long route past the corrals where new foals kicked up dust, past the barn where repairs had erased most signs of the battle, past the kitchen garden Martha was expanding with Elena's help. Inside, Martha had coffee waiting and news from town. "Marshall sent word," she said, pouring them cups. "Granger's trial is set for next month. They're bringing in a judge from Denver to make sure it's handled proper." "Good." Rhett sipped his coffee. "The sooner that's resolved, the better." "There's more. The railroad company is looking to sell Granger's land holdings. Everything he owned in the territory, they want it gone quick to distance themselves from the scandal." Martha paused meaningfully. "Including those plots adjacent to your northern border." Rhett and Elena exchanged glances. Those plots included prime grazing land and, more importantly, the water sources Granger had been so desperate to control. "How much are they asking?" Rhett asked. Martha named a figure that was surprisingly reasonable. The railroad wanted to cut ties fast, and they were willing to take less than market value to do it. "We should buy it," Elena said. "Not to hoard it, but to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. We could extend the settlement program, offer it to more families." Rhett considered it. The old version of himself would have bought it to expand his empire, to dominate more territory. But Elena was right. There was a better use for it. "Set up a meeting with the railroad representatives," he told Martha. "But I want it structured differently. Purchase the land, then establish it as community range. Families who settle here get shared access for grazing, with agreements to prevent overuse. No one person owns it all." Martha raised her eyebrows. "That's awfully progressive thinking, Mr. Calloway." "Call it an experiment. If it works, maybe others will try it. If it fails—" He shrugged. "At least we tried something different." Over the next few weeks, the ranch transformed in ways that went beyond just physical changes. The settlement families brought life and noise, children playing, women hanging laundry, men working together to raise barns and dig wells. What had been Rhett's private empire became something closer to a community. It wasn't always smooth. There were disputes over water access, arguments about whose cattle had damaged whose fence, the inevitable friction of people learning to live and work together. But Elena had a gift for mediation, for hearing both sides and finding compromises that left everyone feeling heard, if not entirely satisfied. Rhett watched her work with something close to awe. This woman who'd survived 15 years of abuse, who'd arrived at his ranch with nothing but the clothes on her back, had somehow become the heart of their growing community. One evening in late May, they hosted a gathering for all the settlement families. It wasn't anything fancy, just simple food, some music from a ranch hand who played fiddle, and space for people to get to know each other. Rhett found himself standing on the edge of the celebration, watching people laugh and talk and build connections. A hand touched his elbow, Mrs. Patterson, who'd recovered from her ordeal and had become a frequent visitor to the ranch. "You look pensive," she said. "Just thinking. This isn't what I expected my life to look like." "Is that a complaint?" "No. Just an observation." Rhett watched Elena dancing with one of the settler children, the little girl standing on Elena's feet as they spun in circles. "I spent 20 years convinced that trusting people was weakness, that the only way to survive was to stand alone. And now? Now I think I was confusing survival with actually living. You can survive alone, but living, real living, requires other people, requires trust and vulnerability and all the things I was terrified of." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "That's quite a revelation from the man who used to glare at anyone who came near his property." "Yeah, well, getting shot gives you perspective." "I think it was more than that. I think it was finding someone who saw past your defenses and decided you were worth the trouble anyway." She nodded toward Elena. "That's a rare gift." "I know." Later that night, after the families had returned to their camps and the ranch had quieted down, Rhett and Elena sat on their porch. The stars were brilliant in the clear spring sky, countless and bright. "I've been thinking," Elena said, "about the future." "What about it?" "About what happens next. We've built something good here. The settlement is working, the ranch is profitable, Granger's in prison. We've won." "Why do I sense a but coming?" Elena smiled. "No but. Just wondering what we do with this victory. We could keep expanding, keep building, or we could—" She trailed off. "Could what?" "Could just live. Enjoy what we have instead of constantly reaching for more." She turned to look at him. "I spent my whole first marriage waiting for things to get better, for the struggle to end. It never did because James didn't know how to stop fighting, even when there was nothing left to fight. I don't want us to become that." Rhett pulled her close. "So what do you want?" "I want this. The ranch running well but not consuming us. The community growing but not overwhelming us. Time to just be together without always planning the next battle." She paused. "And maybe, eventually, a family of our own." Rhett felt his chest tighten. They'd talked around the subject of children before, but never directly. "You want kids?" "Someday. Not now. We've barely figured out how to be married, but someday, yes." Elena looked up at him. "Is that something you want?" "I never let myself think about it before. Having a family meant being vulnerable, and I couldn't afford vulnerability." Rhett was quiet for a moment. "But now? Yes. I think I'd like that. Teaching a kid to ride, watching them grow up on this land, building something that lasts beyond just us. It's terrifying. Completely. But most good things are." They sat in comfortable silence, both thinking about futures that included more than just survival, about possibility instead of just endurance. The trial happened in June, drawing spectators from across the territory. Rhett and Elena both testified about the fire, the harassment, the final attack in the canyon. Mrs. Patterson told her story. The ranch hands described the battle at the ranch. Granger's former employees offered immunity for cooperation, revealed the full extent of his corruption. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. The judge sentenced Granger to 25 years in territorial prison. As they led him away in chains, Granger caught Rhett's eye one last time. Whatever he saw there, triumph, anger, pity, made him look away first. The man who'd terrorized the territory with wealth and violence shuffled out of the courtroom in shackles, diminished and defeated. "How do you feel?" Elena asked as they left the courthouse. Honestly, empty. I thought I'd feel victorious, but mostly I just feel tired. Rhett squinted in the bright sunlight. He spent all that time and money trying to destroy me, and in the end, he destroyed himself. There's no satisfaction in that, just waste. That's because you're not the man he thought you were. He assumed you were like him, that power and revenge were all that mattered. He couldn't see that you'd changed, that you wanted something different. I wanted him to pay for what he did. And he is. But not because you destroyed him. Because he destroyed himself trying to break something that was already stronger than he realized. Elena took his hand. You won by becoming someone he couldn't understand. Someone who cared about more than just winning. They rode back to the ranch in thoughtful silence. The trial's conclusion felt anticlimactic somehow, like the end of a story that had already really finished months ago in a canyon filled with gun smoke and desperation. The real victory, Rhett was starting to understand, hadn't been Granger's conviction. It had been everything that came after. The healing, the building, the choosing to create something new instead of just defending something old. Summer brought its own rhythm to the ranch. The settlement families were established now, their temporary camps replaced by permanent structures. Crops were growing. Cattle were fattening on good grass. The community range system was working better than Rhett had dared hope, with families cooperating on grazing schedules and fence maintenance. The Calloway Ranch was more productive than it had ever been, but in a different way. Not just more cattle or more acres, but more life, more connection, more purpose beyond simple accumulation. Marcus commented on it one afternoon while they were checking the new northern fences. You know what I realized the other day? He said. I've worked for you for 14 years and I've never seen you happy until now. I was happy before. No, sir. You were satisfied sometimes, proud of what you'd built, but happy? That's new? Marcus adjusted his hat. It's good to see. It's strange to feel, Rhett admitted. I'm not used to it. Better get used to it. From what I can see, Mrs. Calloway intends to keep you this way. He was right. Elena had a way of pulling Rhett out of his darker moods, of reminding him that brooding in his study wasn't the same as being productive. She made him laugh, made him try new things, made him see possibilities instead of just problems. In August, they hosted a harvest celebration for the entire community. Settlers, ranch hands, townspeople who'd supported them during the troubles with Granger. It was chaotic and loud and wonderful, nothing like the controlled, isolating life Rhett had lived before. Late in the evening, while people were dancing and children were running wild in the gathering dusk, Rhett found himself talking to Tom Johnson, one of the settlers. I wanted to thank you again, Tom said, for the land, for the help getting started. My family, we'd lost everything after the drought back east. Thought we'd end up in some city tenement, barely surviving. Then we heard about what you were doing here, and it gave us hope. You're doing the work. I just provided the opportunity. It's more than that. You could have kept all this land for yourself, gotten richer and more powerful. Instead, you're sharing it, building something that helps everyone, not just you. Tom looked around at the celebration. That matters to people like us. Gives us faith that the frontier isn't just about who can grab the most and hold it the tightest. After Tom walked away, Elena appeared at Rhett's side. What was that about? He was thanking me for something I should have done years ago. Rhett watched the families enjoying themselves. I wasted so much time, Elena. So much time building walls and hoarding resources and convincing myself that was strength. You can't change the past. I know, but I can do better going forward. We can do better. He pulled her close. Thank you. For what? For seeing something in me worth salvaging. For not giving up when I was being impossible. For teaching me that letting people in doesn't destroy you. It completes you. Elena leaned into him, both of them swaying slightly to the distant fiddle music. You taught me things too, that surviving isn't the same as living, that it's okay to want more than just making it through another day. That trust is worth the risk. They stood like that for a while, surrounded by community and connection, and Rhett felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for 2 decades. It was peace. Actual peace. Not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of contentment. The years that followed brought their own challenges, of course. Drought in '86 that tested everyone's resolve. A hard winter in '87 that reminded them all how unforgiving the frontier could be. the inevitable disputes and difficulties that came from any community trying to work together. But they faced it all together. Rhett and Elena, the ranch hands, the settler families, the growing network of people who'd learned that cooperation was stronger than competition. The ranch became known throughout the territory, not just for its size, but for its philosophy. Other large ranchers started tentatively trying similar settlement programs. The community range model was discussed in territorial legislature meetings. People started asking if maybe there was a better way to develop the frontier than just individual conquest and accumulation. None of it was perfect. Rhett still had days where his old instincts kicked in, where he wanted to retreat behind walls and solve problems alone. Elena still had nightmares about her years with James, still flinched sometimes at raised voices. They argued. They made mistakes. They had to learn and relearn how to be partners, how to share a life without losing themselves. But they kept trying, kept choosing each other, kept building something that mattered more than either of them could have created alone. 5 years after that terrible winter that brought them together, Rhett stood in the same spot where he'd first seen Elena walking through a blizzard toward his ranch. The landscape had changed. More buildings, more fences, more signs of human habitation. But the bones of it remained the same. The endless sky, the rolling grassland, the sense of possibility that had drawn people west in the first place. Elena found him there, their daughter Annie, 3 years old and fearless, riding on her shoulders. "Daddy!" Annie shouted, reaching for him. Rhett took her, settling her on his hip. She immediately started chattering about the horses she'd been watching, the butterflies she'd caught and released, the cookie Martha had given her. Over Annie's head, Rhett met Elena's eyes. In them, he saw his whole life reflected back. The struggle and survival, the choosing to trust, the daily work of building something worthwhile. "Happy?" Elena asked. "Terrified," Rhett admitted, "of losing this, of screwing it up, of not being good enough at this whole family thing." "That means you care. That's what makes you good at it." Annie squirmed down and ran off chasing a grasshopper, her laughter bright in the summer air. Rhett and Elena watched her go, both ready to chase if she got too far, but giving her room to explore. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Rhett said. "About where I'd be if you hadn't stumbled onto my ranch that day. If your horse hadn't gone lame, if the storm had gone a different direction, if any one of 100 small things had been different. You'd probably still be sitting alone in that big house, counting your money and calling it success." "Exactly. And thinking I was happy because I didn't know what actual happiness felt like." He put his arm around Elena. "Everything good in my life came from one moment of choosing to let someone in instead of shutting them out. One choice to trust instead of hide. It wasn't just one choice. You made that choice every day. You still make it." Elena leaned against him. "That's what love is, I think. Not one big romantic gesture, but 1,000 small decisions to choose someone, to trust them, to build with them instead of alone." Annie came running back, grasshopper cupped in her small hands. "Look, I caught him." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Elena said. "But remember what we talked about? We look at the beautiful things, and then we let them go." Annie considered this, then carefully opened her hands. The grasshopper sat there for a moment, seeming to orient itself, then sprang away into the grass. "He's free," Annie announced solemnly. "He is," Rhett agreed, something in his chest going tight. They walked back toward the house together, Annie between them holding both their hands. Around them, the ranch hummed with life and purpose. Smoke rose from settler cabins. Cattle grazed on community range. Ranch hands worked together on fence repairs, their laughter carrying on the wind. This was what victory looked like, Rhett realized. Not defeating enemies or accumulating wealth, but creating something that mattered. Something that would outlast him. Something built not on fear and isolation, but on trust and community. The man who'd spent 20 years convinced that vulnerability was weakness had learned the truth. That opening yourself to loss was the only way to gain anything worth having. That walls kept you safe, but also kept you alone. That the greatest strength wasn't in standing apart, but in standing together. Elena had taught him that. And in learning it, Rhett had discovered that the fortress he'd built, the reputation, the wealth, the carefully controlled distance, had been a prison disguised as protection. Real protection came from connection. Real strength came from trust. Real victory came not from defeating everyone who challenged you, but from building something they couldn't take away even if they tried. That night, after Annie was asleep, and the ranch had settled into evening quiet, Rhett and Elena sat on their porch one more time. The stars were out, brilliant and infinite. "Do you ever regret it?" Rhett asked. "Staying that first time? Getting involved in all this mess?" "Every time you're being stubborn," Elena said with a smile. Then seriously, "No, never. My life before you was about survival. This, us, Annie, the ranch, the community. This is about living. There's a difference." "There is," Rhett agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be problems to solve, disputes to mediate, the endless work of maintaining a ranch and raising a child and building a community. But tonight, in this moment, there was peace. There was connection. There was the quiet satisfaction of knowing they'd taken something broken, two damaged people in a territory torn by greed and violence, and made something whole. The frontier was changing. The wild isolation that had defined it was giving way to communities and cooperation. Men like Granger, who'd ruled through fear and accumulation, were being replaced by people who understood that building together was stronger than conquering alone. And here, on a ranch that had once been a monument to one man's isolation, two people had proven that the greatest legacy wasn't what you owned, but what you created. Not how much you controlled, but how much you shared. Not how many walls you built, but how many you tore down. Rhett Calloway had spent 20 years being the man no woman could tame, the isolated cattle baron who needed nothing and no one. Then Elena Mercer had walked through his gates during a blizzard and shown him a different kind of strength. The strength to trust, the strength to change, the strength to build something that mattered more than pride or wealth or revenge. In the end, that was the real story. Not about defeating an enemy or winning a range war, but about two broken people learning to be whole together. About choosing connection over isolation. About discovering that the things worth having, love, community, purpose, required risking the very vulnerability that fear told you to avoid. The wind rustled through new grass and fields that had been burned and reborn. In the distance, lights glowed from settler cabins where families slept in homes built on hope instead of fear. And on the porch of the main house, two people sat together, no longer alone, no longer isolated, no longer convinced that walls were the same as safety. They'd learned what the frontier was slowly teaching everyone who survived long enough to understand, that strength wasn't in standing alone against the world, but in finding someone strong enough to stand beside you when the world came calling. And that was worth more than all the water rights, all the cattle, all the empty victories that came from winning alone. It was worth everything.